Welcome, everyone. Would you please rise for the invocation and stay standing for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us the opportunity to gather here today. We are thankful for the professional friendship we possess and for providing the way for us to meet, learn, and grow. As we begin our meeting, we are grateful for our community and cherish the opportunities to serve our residents. Bless the presenters, attendees, as well as the City Council. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty. Again, welcome everyone. I'm calling to order the City of Lee Summit regular session number 37. Can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Hodges.
Here.
Councilmember DeMauro.
Here.
Councilmember Pryor.
Here.
Councilmember Shields.
Here.
Councilmember Felker. Councilmember Lovell. Councilmember Edson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Here.
Mayor Baird.
Here. Councilmember Felker is going to be here. He's just running behind. All right. The first thing on the agenda tonight is the motion to adopt the agenda. I have a motion to adopt by Councilmember DeMauro, seconded by Councilmember Shields. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. All right, it passes 7-0. Before we do the consent agenda, it doesn't ever say it in there, but this is the meeting and the month and the day that I have to pick the Mayor Pro Tem. And I know that it's a big surprise, but he's been our Mayor Pro Tem the last 4 years. So I've asked Mayor Pro Tem Betha Lopez to be the Mayor Pro Tem again. This is really an important decision as far as, or role as far as helping with committee assignments. We have different committees that the council members serve on. He's pretty unselfish about that. He tries to take care of everybody first and make sure he fills the role where he's needed. If he accepts, I'm guessing you're going to accept that role for me, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
I appreciate it, and please continue to help us work together in a collaborative and civil manner, and you've been a big part of that, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that's my appointment for the Mayor Pro Tem. Then I would need an approval for the consent agenda. I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda by Councilmember Shields and seconded by Councilmember Pryor. Discussion? Yes, Councilmember Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that there's another set of appointments that I wanted to just take a minute to acknowledge. The Wellness Commission. We are appointing the first set of members for this new commission. I think it's going to be a great group, including one of my constituents and good friends, Carmen Nolke, who I think will be a wonderful addition. So thank you very much for taking the time. I know you spend a lot of time interviewing a lot of people and making sure that would be a good mix of folks. So glad to see it on our agenda tonight.
I'm excited about it. The Wellness Commission is going to help align with our strategic plan. In our strategic plan, we talked about wellness in our community. It was a priority. It was one of our success factors. We even had a wellness committee to talk, during the formation of our strategic plan. I don't know that it was called the Wellness Committee, but it had to do with mental health, physical health, community health. And so we had a tremendous amount of applicants for this Wellness Commission. So there's a lot of talent, and I'm excited about the great things they're going to do together. Mr. Dunning, do you want to add anything on that one? The Wellness Commission's pretty stacked with people that are passionate, so you should be pretty busy with staff supporting them.
And the breadth of the experience and knowledge that this commission will bring is pretty extensive as well.
Yep. Very good. Thank you, sir. Thanks for those comments. Any further comment? Thank you all for those that are here that are serving on that commission. Thank you for coming tonight. Appreciate that. And with that said, we're going to call for the vote. Please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 7-0. So Wellness Commission, as well as some other board members that we just reappointed and appointed, are going to get busy helping us complete those tasks on the strategic plan. Next, we have Council Roundtable. Items of general interest, things of that nature. Councilmember Hodges.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that last Saturday, that council members Pryor and Demaro, myself, and my family went out and did the Just Serve trash pickup. We had a lot of fun doing it. Found some very interesting things, lots of ketchup packets. Not sure what's up with that, but we had a good time doing that. And then I was hoping Felker was going to be here because I was going to say whatever they picked up, we probably picked up at least one trash bag more than their group. And then also today, I had the privilege of going to Hazel Grove Elementary. They asked me to come. They're doing a unit on local government, and I was able to speak to their whole second grade group of kids, and that was a really good experience. And their biggest question for the mayor was, why does he go by Bill when his name is William? So that was their main question for you, so I thought that was pretty cute.
That's awesome. I'll have to think about that. Because I need to be ready in case I am actually answered. I'll see if I can come up with an answer. Thank you. And thank you for doing the litter cleanup. That's four weekends in a row that the Just Serve is doing these cleanups. So that was the third weekend. Is that correct, Councilmember? So there's one more this coming week. If you want to get out, justserve.org is where you can sign up. And it's making a huge difference for our community. So, Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you, Mayor. So last week, we had the Police Department Awards ceremony, and it was good. You were there. Several of us were there. It was a good ceremony. You can watch it on the Lee Summit Police Department Facebook page, and it's just so cool to hear all the stories that you normally don't hear, and you see them winning the awards, and it was just really neat. And then I also wanted to, Trina Cole, who's here tonight for the Proclamations, she went to the state capitol, I guess yesterday or the day before. And so St. Luke's, I guess it would have been yesterday, Monday. St. Luke's Surgery Center was approved for the first Da Vinci Surgery Center in Missouri. So it now has a robot, and she had a huge part in that. So that's awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to say a couple weeks ago, April 22nd, we had the Citizens Leadership Academy mock council meeting, which I was privileged to attend. I know staff put a lot of work into that, and there was a great group of current graduates, former graduates, city staff, council members, all showing up to make it a great experience, and they even let me play the mayor. So it was fun, and I really appreciate the amount of work that staff puts into that. I think it's a great resource for our community every year.
It is a great resource. It's interesting, I didn't know that you were the mayor. I heard that there was a very sassy mayor, but I didn't know that you were playing that role. You had sassy applicants? Okay. Did you wield this thing? I did. Oh my goodness, okay. Very good. Well, thank you for filling that role. We appreciate that very much so. Did you have anything, sir, Councilmember? Do you want to chime in?
I was just going to chime in on the trash pickup.
Yeah, please.
I cleaned out a culvert, and the water was backed up, so I did a little stormwater mitigation, but I also got wet because I didn't expect the water to rush as fast as it did. So now there's no flooding down Blue Parkway, or no, flooding, I guess. I cleaned it out.
That's nice.
So I'm certified for Public Works and Water Services.
He's going above and beyond. All right. Thank you. Councilmember Pryor?
Thank you. So Councilmember Demoro took it very seriously. He showed up with trash picking up tools, and he was down there in the ditches. You could barely even see the top of his head, and he took it very seriously. So Lee Summit's cleaned up because of this from him.
Does not surprise me. All right, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Lopez?
Mayor, I had a note to just bring up and also talk about the Lee Summit Chambers annual golf event that took place last Friday, which was very successful. But now I'm feeling really guilty after all the trash cleanup endeavors and culvert cleanups. But there were several council people that participated as well, so it was a very fun and very positive and successful event. And that's probably a reason why Councilmember Felker, you all beat him with more trash pickup. He was golfing as well, so I'll throw him under the bus a little bit. So,
Very good.
thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, we have a few proclamations this evening. May is a big month for proclamations, it seems, so we're going to start off with Bike and Walk Month. Is Susan Berry here and anybody else that would like to come forward? Oh, goodness, we got a nice group. Come this way, please. Hi. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to hand this down for you to announce who you are in a second, but I'm going to read the proclamation first. I got to grab it over there as well, but excuse me. Whereas bicycling and walking is an economical, healthy, convenient, and environmentally sound form of transportation, and an excellent tool for recreation and enjoyment of Missouri's scenic beauty. Whereas throughout the month of May, the residents of Lee Summit and its visitors will experience the joys of bicycling and walking through educational programs, races, commuting events, charity events, or by simply getting out and going for a ride or walk. Whereas Missouri roads and trail systems attract bicyclists each year, providing economic, health, transportation, tourism, and scenic benefits. And whereas creating bicycle-friendly and walk-friendly communities has been shown to improve citizens' health, well-being, and quality of life, support communities for all ages, to boost community spirit, to improve traffic safety, and to reduce pollution and congestion. And whereas promoting greater public awareness of cycling and walking and safety education may help reduce accidents, injuries, and fatalities. Not just may, it does. Therefore, by the virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Lee Summit, I do hereby proclaim the month of May 2023 as Bike and Walk Month. So give me a round of applause, please. Are you a biker or a walker, and what's your name?
My name is Molly Wickman, and I do both. And Lee Summit has many great trails and sidewalks for everyone to get out and enjoy in May and other months.
Yeah, I'm a biker and a walker also. My name is Mike Vestweber, and I'm with the Wellness Commission.
Jeff Brandhorst, I'm a biker and walker as well.
Ed Kramer, enjoy riding my bike still and walking, and Molly and Michael and Jeff and I are all members of the Livable Streets Advisory Board, at least we were, and now we're members of the Wellness Commission and happy about that. So I just want to encourage everybody to get out and move outside. So biking, walking, be careful, wear your helmet if you're biking. If you're driving, or when we're all driving, let's be careful and really pay attention to those who might be walking or biking on or near the street. So, and I'm happy to have Dr. Wesley Goodrich right next to me, and I just want to say that he is wasn't on the LSAB, but he's now on the Wellness Commission. So, welcome.
Thank you. Yep, so Wesley Goodrich, kind of newer to the community, been here for a couple years, really enjoying you guys' walkways and parks, especially Legacy. So I would definitely call myself more of a bicycler of the two, but I will walk if I have to.
I'm Susan Berry. I served as the staff liaison for the Livable Streets Advisory Board, and I was so happy that all these people decided to come and stand up here with me, so I didn't have to stand by myself. So I'm looking forward to starting working with all of them on the Wellness Commission.
I'd like a photo real quick. We just take a photo. Who wrote this proclamation? I'm just curious. It was very well written. I didn't fumble on the words like I do most of these.
I'll take credit for it.
Okay, hold on. I have to show the proclamation here. Thank you all. All right. Next, we have the National Historic Preservation Month, and I think Michelle's here. Michelle? Did I see you? Yeah, come forward if you would like. Yeah, come forward over here. All right, gentlemen. This is Historic Preservation Month as well. So whereas historic preservation is an effective tool for preserving community history, managing growth, revitalizing neighborhoods, fostering local pride, and maintaining community character while enhancing livability, and whereas historic preservation is relevant for communities across the nation, both urban and rural, and for Americans of all ages, all walks of life, and all ethnic backgrounds. And whereas it is important to celebrate the role of history in our lives and contributions made by dedicated individuals in helping to preserve the tangible aspects of our heritage that has shaped us as people. Whereas in remembrance of Lee Summit's history and notable historic figures, the Lee Summit Cultural Commission encourages all residents and visitors of Lee Summit to celebrate the role of history in our lives and champion the preservation of our community as it grows and develops into the future. By virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Lee Summit, I hereby proclaim May 2023 as National Historic Preservation Month. All right. Thank you. And would you state your name?
My name is Michel Senier de Kerobert. I used to be the vice president of the the city of Lee Summit's Historic Preservation Commission. It was phased out at the end of December, and we hope the new Cultural Commission will serve as the acting Historic Preservation Commission. So we're excited about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Josh Johnson, Director of Development Services. I just wanted to highlight some stuff we're going to be doing for Historic Preservation Month. We're going to have a lottery that involves two separate contests. One's going to be for photos of historic buildings, and then a trivia contest. This is all going to go out over social media, and then we're going to randomize that and hand out gift cards based on that. So encourage everybody to participate, and it's going to be a great month for historic preservation. Oh.
Shannon McGuire, staff liaison to the new Cultural Commission.
We'll take a photo, please. Thank you all. Okay, next we have Building Safety Month. Who's coming up to do Building Safety Month with me? Oh, Mr. Johnson. Oh, many people. Good, 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 good. Oh, yeah. You got your team. Whereas the City of Lee Summit is committed to reorganizing, our growth and strength depends on safety and essential role of I messed that one up. You must have written this one. All right. Lee Summit is committed to recognizing our growth and strength our strength depends on safety and essential role our homes. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. Buildings and infrastructure play, both in everyday life and when natural disasters strike. Whereas our confidence in the resilience of these buildings that make up our community is achieved through the devotion of vigilant guardians, building safety and fire prevention officials, architects, engineers, builders, tradespeople, design professionals, laborers, plumbers, and others in the construction industry who work year-round to ensure the safe construction of buildings. I call you guys the pillars of the city, you know? Yep. Whereas Building Safety Month is sponsored by the International Code Council to remind the public about the critical role of our community's largely unknown protectors of public safety, our local code officials, who assure us of safe, sustainable, and affordable buildings that are essential to our prosperity. Whereas it starts with you is the theme for Building Safety Month 2023. It encourages us all to raise awareness about building safety on a personal, local, and global scale. By virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Lee Summit, I do hereby proclaim May 2023 as Building Safety Month. Do you like that part about the codes inspectors being, doing their job? I mean, that's pretty good there. So, yeah, please, Mr. Johnson, say a few words and then have everybody introduce themselves.
You got it. Thank you, Mayor Baird. First of all, I want to say we're having a Coffee with Contractors event, and anybody in the community is welcome here in Development Services here at City Hall on the first floor. That's going to be Thursday, May 25th from 7:30 to 8:30 a.m., of course. I just wanted to highlight the work these guys do. Thousands of inspections a year on all our buildings, commercial and residential. We average about 300 single-family homes a year, so that's a lot of work, and it's all to keep us safe as we're in these buildings. So thank you, everybody.
Brian Page, Facility Manager for the city.
Tracy Deister, Codes Administration Manager.
Mark Harding, Building Inspection Manager.
Jim Eden, Assistant Fire Chief and Fire Marshal.
Oh, nope, stay here for a photo, Tracy, please. Squeeze in. Thank you all. Thank you. All right. And we have Nurses Month. I know Trina's here. Who else? Yeah, come on up, please. They're all written fine. It's just that you get up here and it's tough. It's tough in front of a crowd. So, whereas beginning in 1991, National Nurses Week is celebrated annually from May 6th, also known as National Recognition Day for Nurses, through May 12th, the birthday of Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing. Whereas registered nurses in the United States constitute our nation's largest health care profession and are an indispensable component of the safety and quality of care of hospitalized, ambulatory, and home patients. And whereas the depth and breadth of the registered nursing profession meets the different and emerging healthcare needs of the American population in a wide range of settings. Whereas the American Nurses Association, as the voice for registered nurses in this country, is working to chart a new course for a healthy nation that relies on increasing access to primary and preventative health care. Whereas the demand for registered nursing services will be greater than ever because of the aging of the American population, the continuing expansion of life-sustaining technologies, and the explosive growth of home health care services. And whereas the cost-effective, safe, and high-quality healthcare services provided by registered nurses will be an increasingly important component of the United States healthcare delivery system in the future, the Missouri Nurses Association has declared May as Nurses Month with a theme, You Make a Difference, a nod to nurses' sheer numbers, their unparalleled impact during the pandemic and healthcare, and an open invitation to thank a nurse, #thankanurse, for enriching our lives and the world we live in. By virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Lee Summit, I do hereby proclaim May 2023 as Nurses Month. And like so many nurses do not want the notoriety or the public. They didn't even want this read in the meeting. They're like, we'll just take the proclamation, but I thank you for coming because we do want to celebrate you and celebrate Nurses Month. So, Trina, you want to say a few words?
Sure. So, thank you, everyone. One thing that doesn't say is for many years, probably at least 20, the nursing profession has been the most trusted profession of all professions. So, we appreciate that, and hopefully, we do things that keep you guys thinking that we're trustworthy. The other thing is I want to thank all of the nurses. There's all different levels of nursing from LPNs all the way up to doctorates in nursing, and we do a variety of things. Some folks are clinical, some folks do case management, there's home health, there's hospice, there's lots of levels in nursing. So we accept this on behalf of all of the nursing career folks. This is and I am very blessed and honored to have her with me today. This is my director of nursing. I'm the administrator at St. Luke's Surgery Center, which, Mia, bad girl. But but she is amazing, and I'm glad to have her with me, but I'll just see if she wants to say anything. Sherry Frock is her name.
You're really going to give it to me this time, okay. That's right. No, are there any other nurses here tonight? No nurse? Okay. Yeah, I just want to recognize you. So, all right. All right, well, thank you so much.
Sorry, once I get this microphone. So I didn't know everyone else that was coming here, but what an amazing group of people here. I drink water. We're not to that one yet, but that's great. I walk and I bike, and my entire family does. I don't build anything or inspect things, but I appreciate all of the work that you all do too.
All right, no, photo, please. Photo, please. And by the way, nurses are the most respected, elected officials are the least. So we cherish these moments where we can share a brand for just a moment. Thank you. Okay, and it's Drinking Water Week. So I see Mr. Schaffler, Mr. Bennett coming down. Squeeze in. All right, excellent. Great group. I'm going to come this way so we can fit Jeff in. There we go. All right. Proclamation. Whereas water is our most valuable natural resource. Whereas drinking water serves a vital role in daily life, serving an essential purpose to health, hydration, and hygiene needs for the quality of life of our citizens to enjoy. Whereas tap water delivers public health protection, fire protection, support for our economy, and quality of life we enjoy. Whereas the hard work performed by the entire water sector, designing capital projects, operators ensuring the safety and quality of drinking water, or a member of a pipe crew maintaining the infrastructure communities rely on to transport high-quality drinking water from its source to its consumers' taps. Whereas the coronavirus pandemic has shone a light on the importance of drinking water for health, hydration, and hygiene needs, whereas the citizens of our city are called upon to help protect our source waters from pollution, practice water conservation, and get involved with their water by familiarizing themselves with it. By virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Lee Summit, I declare and proclaim May 7 through 13, 2023 as Drinking Water Week. So drink water. Mr. Bennett, you want to start us off?
Sure. Don Bennett, Assistant Director of Customer Care. We just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to celebrate next week with utilities across the country the importance of drinking water in communities. We also like to thank all of our staff, past, present, and future, that have put in tireless nights and resources in maintaining the infrastructure to continue to provide life in this community.
Dana R. Curry, Water Utilities.
Cinda Rader. I'm a resident participant of the Water Utility Board, and thank you, Mayor, for giving me that privilege to do that.
Mark Schaffler, Director, and I thank you for for the entire Water Utilities Advisory Board. They are a customer-based board that should take part in this celebration. They have a big role they play in bringing water services to our community.
Brent Boyce, Assistant Director of Business Services.
Chris Sandy, Assistant Director of Operations.
Jeff Thorne, Deputy Director.
Squeeze in a little bit. All right, well done. Thank you all. Mr. Schaffler, Mr. Bennett. It's not as easy as it looks out there, just so you all know. Okay, my computer logged me out. Yeah. Okay, we are on public comment? Okay. We are on public comments. Oh, okay. I have a public commenter. Ms. Fallenweider's here today. Ms. Fallenweider?
Teresa Vollenweider. Address is 5201 Northeast Maybrook Road since September 2003. I've been taking some classes in surveying to learn about that profession. And it's been really interesting, extremely interesting. And one of the things I came upon was a website where surveyors go to vent. And one of the big questions is to record or not record surveys. In Missouri, as of August of 1990, any original survey was supposed to be recorded. Doesn't always happen, but it should. But I wanted to take the time to read a little bit about what some of these surveyors say about recording surveys. One says, huge con, great, wonderful. Now take a plat down to the Register of Deeds office and actually try. Here we have this little thing called a review officer. When the rules were written, they were in place to keep pissant bureaucrats from demanding all kinds of things on every survey done in the county. Now you could put city in there too if you wanted to. The idea was if a plat was all of an existing property and it did not create a new street or change an existing street, the plat was to be recorded without further requirements. The rules were also written such that it was suggested that a certified property mapper would be designated as the review officer. In our 100 counties, the figure I saw was 95% were, right, planning officials, not certified property mappers. So what has happened is the planning officials now have nearly unlimited power to require nearly anything they want. I had one idiot hold up a simple plat for more than 6 months. He was demanding that I put a note on that plat that the property was not approved for a well or a septic. I told him that note would not appear on my plat unless and until it was true. In this case, it was not true. My client did not need a well or a septic permit and had not filed for the permit. The reason the planner wanted this note, he knew the chairman of the planning board worked at the health department and that he would got to put money in his pocket every time someone asked for a permit. That is why I am opposed to mandatory recording. If we had a system where any PLS, professional land surveyor, could take any plat to the Register of Deeds office and record for a nominal fee, I would be fine with it. As is, petty bureaucrats with their own agenda can hold up projects for any reason and for no reason at all. I'll be back to read more.
Very, very good. Thank you. Next, Michelle, you had filled out a public comment. Did you want to make public comment? Yes.
Good evening again, Mayor Baird, Mr. Beto Lopez, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of the City Council. As you know, I used to be the Vice President of the Historic Preservation Elite Summit, and once again, I hope that the new Cultural Commission will start soon and will be the acting commission for the historic preservation. Now, I wanted to say something, and this is like a request. I recall that the very last meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission took place on Wednesday, October 26, 2022. It was the very last meeting that took place. And there are no published minutes available. And then the Historic Preservation Commission was phased out. As you understand, there's going to be the new Cultural Commission that's going to take over. But anyway, the bottom line is that the request I have is that the commissioners agreed back then that a 3D, which is a three-dimensional survey or recording of the 1896 historic ice house right across the street be done in order to be able to basically make accurate 3D renditions in the future available to the public and the city of Lee Summit, and to possibly make, make it available in any possible scale. So I think this is the detail of importance. The building is still standing, and I think it's a good thing that the technology be utilized, the 3D survey, for posterity. And once the building is gone, we can recreate it at a smaller scale, and people can see the inside and the outside of this building that unfortunately its days are counted. It was just a request. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate
Have a
it.
good night. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we've had lots of warm proclamations and more tonight, but we got some business to get to with regard to presentations and first readings. The first thing we're going to start off with is one that we've been looking forward to for quite some time. It's called the Best Practices for Economic Development Organizations. So when you hear EDO, that stands for Economic Development Organization. We've got Mr. Elam here. We've got our consultant, Mr. Weiler, with Thomas P. Miller Associates. Mr. Elam, would you like to start us off?
Yes, Mayor Baird, members of the council, thank you very much for having us here this evening. My role in this is going to be very brief. I just wanted to say publicly thank you to Mr. Weiler and his staff for their participation in this project and doing this work and research for us here. So Brett Weiler is the Senior Director of Economic Development and Strategic Planning for Thomas P. Miller and Associates. He had some help on this project with Lindsay Blues and Casey Bunch on his team, and myself and David Bushek and Betty Worldman and Josh Johnson had several different conversations with these individuals, and just wanted to say that great to work with, and looking forward to their presentation here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Weiler.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. I am excited to be here. I wasn't sure I was going to get here today. It has been an adventurous day. I'm coming from Northwest Pennsylvania. My day started at 5 a.m. It involved cars and buses and trolleys and planes, but I finally made it, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share the findings from our study. As Ryan mentioned, my firm was hired to conduct an analysis, a research paper on best practices for economic development organizations. You'll hear them referred to as EDOs throughout this presentation. As mentioned, I represent TPMA. TPMA is a national consulting firm based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. We will be celebrating our 35th anniversary next year. Named after our namesake, Thomas P. Miller, who's still involved in the business today. I will get a call from Tom tomorrow morning to hear how this presentation went. He's still very actively involved. But we are a fully remote staff. We have about 50 consultants on staff representing 12 different states. Myself, as I mentioned, am based in Northwest Pennsylvania, Erie, Pennsylvania specifically. And we have done work in 48 states out of the 50 states across the country. We like to say that we operate at the intersection of workforce and economic development and education. My team, the Economic Development Service team, we do economic development strategic plans at the local, regional, and state level all over the country. We do a couple other kind of ancillary services and products as well. My background, I come to you today as a consultant for about 2 years now. Prior to that, 15 years of economic development experience, working for both nonprofit corporations and for municipal government. I've worked in business retention and expansion, business attraction, workforce development, capital finance strategy, entrepreneurial ecosystem building, whatever was asked of me. I still maintain board and volunteer positions in the economic development space in Erie, Pennsylvania, specifically in the entrepreneurial ecosystem building space and quality of life initiatives. I'm a member of the International Economic Development Council, the Pennsylvania Economic Development Association, and I'm currently taking courses at Oklahoma University in their Economic Development Institute. And so I think my background and our firm's background is important to cover with all of you as we get into our findings. So I do want to walk through our agenda very briefly. This was a pretty dense document by the end of it. I don't know if I necessarily envisioned that at the start, but this was a really great project for us. I mentioned we do a lot of economic development strategic plans for communities, kind of activating economic development. This was an opportunity to kind of take a step back and look at what made economic development organizations and the communities they operate in, what foundations do they have that make them successful? And so this was a really great opportunity for us to kind of look at that organizational level of economic development. And so today I'm going to try to synthesize this dense document into hopefully an accessible overview and presentation for all of you. So I will spend some time talking about the scope and purpose of this work. I think it's very important that we understand what the scope was here. I will give an overview of common EDO structures. I will talk about some of our research findings, some of the commonalities that we uncovered for high-performing EDOs across the country. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of our findings from a case study analysis that we performed on 5 organizations across the country. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about recommendations for Lee Summit. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail here in a moment on what those recommendations look like. So you'll see here on the screen, I tried to synthesize the purpose of the study into one sentence. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is help Lee's Summit understand how to structure and ultimately optimize its economic development service delivery. And we worked through a very deliberate process to do that. First, we identified and outlined what we're calling these common EDO structures. Okay, we outline how they operate, how they're funded, and we outline advantages and disadvantages to each structure. We'll talk about public EDOs, private EDOs, and public-private partnership EDOs. Second, we identified and outlined the common functions and service provisions of EDOs. These include business attraction and marketing, business retention and expansion, entrepreneurial development, and workforce development. In a later slide, I'll expand upon those common functions to talk about some of the ancillary or supportive functions that I think are also important considerations. Next, we took it to the next level, and we tried to look at high-performing EDOs. Okay, and this is very important to note, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail later, but evaluating EDO performance can be a challenging endeavor, okay, for a variety of reasons. However, for this study, we were able to look at some qualitative characteristics, some common characteristics across high-performing EDOs. These EDOs were identified by the International Economic Development Council, which I mentioned previously. If you're not familiar, that is the premier trade association for economic development organizations and practitioners across the world. So we look to them to kind of identify these qualitative characteristics. Next, we tried to take a look and see what these characteristics looked like in actual practical application. okay? So we performed a case study analysis on 5 EDOs in comparable communities to Lee's Summit. And I'll talk a little bit about our methodology, how we identify these comparable communities or these organizations in comparable communities. In this case study analysis, we looked at their organizational structure, their organizational strategy, and their organizational performance. We were actually able to interview 3 out of the 5 organizations. We were really hoping for 5 out of 5, but we were able to speak at length with 3 out of the 5 organizations or representatives from those organizations. And then lastly, in the document, we provide a strategic framework for leadership to consider how Lee's Summit should structure its economic development organization and ecosystem for the future. Okay? We don't necessarily make an explicit recommendation that says you should structure it this way and you should do this, that, and the other, but rather we provide a framework, a set of considerations, a set of questions, and metrics to consider. We also point out some of these recommendations in action from some of the organizations that we analyzed. I know this introduction is long, but I really want to cover 2 quick points before we move forward because I think they're critically important. We like to say, if you've seen one EDO, you've seen one EDO, okay? And what we mean by that is that no 2 EDOs are alike. No matter their structure, no matter the communities that they operate in, no 2 EDOs are alike. We recognize that successful EDOs operate with a common understanding of common economic development principles and theories, but ultimately EDOs need to customize their service provisions to the markets that they operate in. If I may provide an example, when I worked in Erie, people said, "Why are you not focused on business attraction?" And we said, because we have nowhere to put them. We had no commercial space. We had no industrial space. So the circumstances of our community compelled us to focus on brownfield remediation, greenfield development, commercial, industrial redevelopment, reinvestment. We customized our service provisions to meet the needs of our community. Second, the purpose of this study was not to analyze the past or the current EDO structure or ecosystem in Lee's Summit. I know nothing about the economic development services and ecosystem in Lee's Summit. That was on purpose. I did not want the current status, previous iterations of the ecosystem to influence our research. I did have one team member do a very basic kind of, she looked at some of the structures in place. I think it is featured in our document at about a half a page. But me specifically, I don't know what is going on in Lee's Summit, and that is on purpose. This study was intended to be future-facing, to give you things to think about as you think about the future of economic development in Lee's Summit. Okay. I can be long-winded, so I'm going to try to
You're doing fine.
get into the meat here. Okay,
This,
so
this is important to us, so.
Great.
Hit what you need to hit.
Great. So let's start with common EDO structures. Okay, I mentioned earlier there are 3 of them. We have the public EDO, the private EDO, and the public-private partnership. Okay, you can see that on the screen here. Public EDOs are typically a division or department of local, county, or state government. Typically, they offer a very standard set of services that are closely aligned with government-related service provision. They're typically funded through a general fund, which is funded by taxpayer revenue. We do see in some instances where public EDOs are supported by special revenue funds, assessment funds, internal service funds, etc. Public EDOs are also able to procure state and federal funds to support their activities. Next, we have private EDOs. Okay, they are typically structured as a 501c3, a 501c4, or a 501c6. They typically offer more specialized services. Some of the common structures that we've outlined, some of the common private structures that we've outlined in the study include chambers of commerce, economic development corporations, community development corporations, and CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions. Funding comes from both public and private sources. Could be membership fees, dues, other investment from the private sector. They're also, in some instances, able to procure federal, state, and regional grant funds, and in some cases, philanthropic sources as well. Lastly, we have our public-private partnership, typically established as a nonprofit corporation with board representation from both the private and public sector. These are typically policy planning or, the purpose of this study, implementation-based, so project-specific. Okay, they rely on a variety of sources from both the private and public sector. The capital campaigns, interest on loan programs, fees from loan programs, investment income, a variety of sources can fund the public-private partnership. So I want to take a quick moment to distinguish between the private nonprofit and the public-private partnership, because they look a lot alike in some ways in our research, but I think there's something really critical to point out. For the purposes of this study, the private EDO is a mission-based organization. The public-private partnership is an implementation-based organization. So perhaps I could provide an example. So when we talk about a mission-based role, the private EDO is focused on cultivating a strong local economy in Lee's Summit. Okay? In a public-private partnership, which is more implementation-based, we may say, we are focused on reinvesting and redeveloping commercial space in key commercial corridors in Lee's Summit, okay? So really kind of focused on implementation, where the private, for the purpose of this study, is a little bit more broadly based around a mission-based role. Let's talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages of public EDOs, some of which I've outlined in my overview, is that they're, access to public funding, whether that's through the Economic Development Administration at the federal level, whether it's through the state economic development apparatus. Recently, we've seen funding through ARPA support economic development activities for public EDOs. Public EDOs have control of incentives. And this third one, I think, is very important to point out, is this physical proximity to public resources. These public resources that support economic development in a support role, right? So your planning office, your code enforcement office, zoning, city engineering. We heard from a number of the public EDOs that we spoke with that the physical proximity in City Hall with these adjacent services was an advantage to them. Also, the formal and informal influence that City Hall has on economic development, whether that's public policy or whether that's the influence that elected officials have on the agendas and directions of the community. The disadvantages: public EDOs are susceptible to politics and elections. I don't know how often your mayor and his team are elected in Lee's Summit, but turnover can halt progress, and politics for a public EDO can be an inhibiting factor. They're also bound by political jurisdictions, which inhibits your ability to think regionally. Economic development is a globally competitive industry, and public EDOs are limited by the jurisdictions they've been outlined to serve. Public scrutiny. Public scrutiny can be a very good thing. It's a very important thing. Transparency is important, but public scrutiny can also inhibit progress. Lastly, I want to talk about confidentiality. Confidentiality poses problems. Site selectors, those individuals representing businesses who are looking to move or expand into new markets, operate under the utmost strictest confidentiality, and public transparency laws sometimes inhibit that confidentiality for public EDO personnel members. Private EDOs, as a private nonprofit corporation, they're more agile and they have more freedom to make decisions, specifically around hiring, firing, compensation, strategic direction, etc. They're also able to offer services beyond traditional government, such as hosting events, customized programming, certain technical resources and services. And they also can be more creative in how they generate revenue to support their operation. Private EDOs, by nature being private, are also able to take on more calculated risk and are oftentimes seen as more innovative and creative in their approaches. Disadvantages, again, you'll see susceptible to politics and elections. I will just take a moment right now to say economic development in general is very political. And so I don't think you'll escape that political environment no matter the structure that you have. Oftentimes, private nonprofit corporations fall victim to scope creep. And what I mean by that is that they start offering services or focusing on activities to generate revenue to support their organization and lose sight of the original mission of supporting the local economy in their community. Oftentimes, it can be very difficult to appropriately engage and empower board members on any nonprofit for any nonprofit organization. So appropriately engaging and empowering and involving a board of directors can be a challenge for private EDOs. And lastly, they do lack the public powers. I mentioned earlier, control of the incentives by the public EDO, taxing ability, public land management, zoning, etc. I go and contradict myself because the first one we see here with the P3s is the limited politicization. I don't know. I'm not sure I support that one with it on here on the screen. Again, with the public-private partnership, freedom in hiring, firing, and compensation. Again, that ability to take calculated risks. Again, able to procure public funding, but perhaps less susceptible to some of the bureaucratic red tape that private or public EDOs face. And they're able to develop sustainable funding sources, whether that's through unique and novel investment approaches, capital campaigns, tapping into philanthropic sources, etc. Lastly, some of the disadvantages, there's a perception that P3s have limited accountability. Oftentimes, they lack appropriate transparency, which it negatively affects public trust, and oftentimes that lack of transparency may lead to blurred decision-making.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
because you've got a 98-page report, and then this is a 28-page slide, so I just want to make sure I understand, we understand.
Yep.
The private versus public-private partnership. The type of public-private partnership you're talking about is one that, well, first off, let's go back to the private. The public, you said, is general funding, public funding such as the general fund, or it could be, you said, specific or funding sources, but it's definitely public. The private, you didn't say how it's funded. So revenue, it says revenues can be public, private, and fee-for-service. And then on the public-private, you're saying public funding with less red tape. So based on what you're saying, when you say private, it can still have public funding.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because when we look at, the way things are structured here, even though you're not specifically, telling us how we're structured, we're probably more in this private EDO current situation as we've been doing. So that's just for us to understand.
Yeah.
Because we're not, when you say public-private, there's this, layman's terms wise, people might think, oh, that's a public, the city and the ED organization they work together and there's public funding, so it's a public-private partnership. But based on what you're saying, this implementation focus, that's not what we've done in the past here. We're a private-funded EDO that gets public tax dollars. Does that make sense?
Yes, based on the limited knowledge I do have about current structures in Lee's Summit, it is a private, nonprofit corporation that receives public funding. As part of its, I would say.
Now, the distinction, would you go over the distinction again? I got some legal minds on here, so I want to make sure we understand this part as we're going forward, because you're talking about decision-making when it comes to the public-private partnerships that have to do with financing of projects. You're talking about an organization, when you talk about public-private, that raises money to I know that we have some examples in the local Kansas City area of public-private. Mr. Elam, can you point out a couple? I can only think of one right now, but.
Yeah, okay, sorry, doesn't sound like it's on from here. So thinking through in the context of this report, with the differences in the missions really being the differentiator versus that mission-based versus that implementation type of role. I was kind of thinking that the public-private partnership would be kind of a little bit more like a Port KC or a Planned Industrial Expansion Authority that has more of that implementing role of the incentives and the financing aspects of it versus our current structure here that is more broad-based, generally there to support overall economic development activities. And our current EDO doesn't have the ability to really implement any incentives on their own.
Okay. Is that accurate? Okay. Okay, I just want to, I wanted to clarify that before you move forward. Thank you, Mr. Weiler.
Yeah. Just trying to find my way back.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
I usually don't interrupt, but
Nope.
but it's the language doesn't fit what we use in the general public sometimes, is what I'm saying. It's this is your industry, and you're explaining what the definitions are in your industry, but in our terminology, we use different terms, so.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that these definitions, again, we relied heavily on the International Economic Development Council's definition. That was really the foundation of our research. And again, we look to them as the premier trade association in our industry. And so it was a natural fit for us to rely on those definitions and those differentiating factors across the different structures.
Understood. Thank you.
So beyond the structures, I think it's important to understand the functionality of EDOs. And you see some words here on the screen, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit, but I think it's important to note that in our professional opinion, EDOs play a larger role than just the functionality you see on the screen here. We believe that EDOs need to be advocates for the communities that they operate in. They need to be educators. They need to be analysts. They need to be cheerleaders. They need to be champions. In many ways, they are one of a few of the faces of your community. You'll see here some of the common functions of EDOs, and I've mentioned them previously in the presentation, but it is serving the current businesses in your community, ensuring that they stay in your community, and ensuring that they have the resources and the tools and the talent to expand and grow. It's also to attract new businesses to the community, specifically new businesses that support your existing industrial base, businesses that are poised for growth. It is also important for EDOs to cultivate an environment that hatches or launches the new risk takers and innovators and entrepreneurs in your community. And then all the while, EDOs also need to be mindful of the workforce and the talent in their community. I would also say that EDOs and some EDOs across the country focus specifically on functions beyond that, beyond these on the screen. Some of those include quality of life initiatives, tourism, talent attraction, real estate development, financing, and lending. Before I go any further, I think it's important to note that we're here talking about economic development organizations, but the way that communities thrive, in our professional opinion, is through an economic development ecosystem. Organizations that understand these critical functions and utilize limited resources to serve all of these functions for a community. So we talk about these common functions of an EDO. We want to take it a step further and try to understand what makes a high-performing economic development organization. And we have a quote on the screen from the IEDC. I'm not going to read to you, but I think this is an important point or an important moment to stop and talk about this performance measurement piece. I talked a little bit about it earlier, but measuring and evaluating EDOs on quantitative measures can be a difficult endeavor. Okay? Performance measurement for economic development organizations can be more complex and complicated than traditional industries for, again, a variety of reasons. It is very difficult to prove causation and correlation. Okay? EDO's efforts are not often immediate, and they are sometimes hard to connect and quantify. EDO's work typically revolves around making connections and building relationships and solving problems, which also can be hard to quantify. It's also important to note that a community's success is contingent upon many variables, many factors outside of an EDO's control. I will once again cite Erie, Pennsylvania. Erie, Pennsylvania is the snowiest city in the country. So sometimes the weather is a factor in our economic development success. So kind of a half-joking example, but it's an external factor outside of our control. So I think it's important to be mindful of that when we're thinking about evaluating or identifying these high-performing EDOs. With all that said, we're not suggesting that we don't try to track performance, we don't try to understand how an EDO is performing, but we need to recognize that it can be difficult, specifically when we're talking about quantifiable performance evaluation. Because of that difficulty, our research led us to look at these more qualitative success factors across high-performing EDOs. And so once again, we looked to the International Economic Development Council to outline high-performing EDOs for us. And then we began our analysis to understand and identify what common traits do these EDOs have that are making them successful. And I've outlined some of them here on the screen for you, and I'll go into in a little bit more here in a moment. First and foremost, we believe that high-performing EDOs demonstrate effective leadership. I mentioned earlier that EDOs perform a role beyond just service provision. They need to be a convener, a connector, a collaborator. They are, in many ways, the face of your community, especially when we're looking at talent or businesses who are perhaps considering relocating to Lee's Summit. We found leaders that were creative thinkers, effective communicators, innovators, and risk takers. We saw this not just with the CEOs or the executive directors, but we also saw this at the board level. We saw boards for private EDOs that were engaged, that were empowered, that took very seriously their role as ambassadors of the community. We also saw organizations that invested in their leadership and their talent. We like to joke that economic development is actually a profession, right? There are technical skills required to do the job. There is experience that lends itself well to economic development leadership. And then there are certainly also those intangible factors that make these high-performing, effective leaders. But economic development is a profession, and the high-performing EDOs that we analyzed, they invested in that talent, in those skill sets, in their leaders and in their staff. Second, they were customer-oriented. They were able to distinguish who their direct beneficiaries were and their indirect beneficiaries are. And that seems perhaps like a trivial or easy distinction. But we found that oftentimes it's unclear who EDOs are serving. Are they serving the business community, the existing business community? Are they serving site selectors? Are they serving real estate developers? Are they serving the elected officials? The high-performing EDOs we analyzed, they understood very clearly who their clients were. And more times than not, it was the businesses and entrepreneurs in their communities. Because they understood those clients, they were able to offer customized programs and resources. They were meeting the needs of the clients in their community. They were also soliciting feedback. Everybody we talked to and everybody we investigated was highly focused on business retention, expansion, outreach. They were going out and talking to businesses, understanding their needs, and that information was informing the programs and the resources and the technical services that they were offering. At the end of the day, economic development practitioners are problem solvers. And that's what high-performing EDOs are, and that's what they do. They solve problems for their primary customers. We also found that high-performing EDOs were equity-focused. They had a demonstrable commitment to DEI, both internally and externally in the business community. They recognized that diversity, equity, inclusion was not only a moral imperative, but it was good for business. It led to a more vibrant community. It offered their residents more cultural amenities and experiences, and it facilitated more creative thinking and innovation. They were all very intentional about their diversity and equity inclusion activities. We saw this in their programming. We also saw this in the composition of their staffs and their boards. And when we talk about staff and board diversification, we're talking not only ethnicity and race and gender, we're talking experience, age, industry, technical proficiency. They had very diverse skill sets and individuals on their boards. We also found that they were always focused on the future, consistently thinking beyond current economic conditions. These are traditionally the O and the T of your SWOT analysis, right? What are the opportunities, the external opportunities, and what are the external threats? In our study, we provide a framework for thinking future ready, and it's all about understanding global economic forces and recognizing what can we control, what can we influence, and what do we need to be aware of. They were able to utilize technology internally to enhance their service provision. They were also able to facilitate technology adoption in the businesses in their community. And they were always focused on professional development, continuous learning, getting better, knowing more, staying at the cutting edge of their local economy and understanding where it's going next. They were guided by results. I think this started with a sense of transparency. We felt that this transparency garnered public support and public trust. Albeit difficult, they were committed to evaluating their performance both by some common economic development data sets, jobs created, tax base, but also qualitative measures. They were also committed to strategic planning and working their plan and updating their plan and recognizing that it should guide all of their decisions. And then once again, they utilized technology. In this context, they used, we found that they used CRM systems to streamline and understand and capture business retention and expansion visits, utilize technology to scout businesses that were expanding or growing, to identify prospects, etc. Purpose and plan. Admittedly, this feels a little duplicative when I'm up here explaining it, but we're going to roll with it. I think what's most important here, well, they're all important. I think they all had demonstrable organizational and community values. And it seemed that the values drove the decisions that they were making as an organization. They also had well-articulated visions for the future. They saw themselves as storytellers. They were able to tell the story of their communities, whether through multimedia, their website, over the phone, in an interview. I suspect when they're meeting with site selectors or businesses in their own town or talent, but they were able to tell their story about their community. They had an understanding of their strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. And they were willing and able to adapt to changing market conditions. This is an important one. They're all important. This is a relationship-based industry, practice, profession, whatever you want to call it. Relationships are key. And economic development is a team sport. It is my personal professional opinion that an ecosystem approach is the optimal approach to economic development. This includes, well, there's a couple things. So it's a team sport, as I mentioned. Notably, high-performing EDOs are able to foster strong relationships with their elected officials, whether that's local, regional, state, or federal. We don't get the sense that they necessarily agree with them all the time, but they've built relationships built upon trust and are well aligned. We saw a number of organizations that, while respecting or focused on their individual, unique characteristics of their community and their own autonomy, were all very well aligned with their state and federal partners. We talk about trust and respect, and I think this is important to call out real quick. It goes two ways in this context. Highly effective, high-performing EDOs and the practitioners that work for these organizations are able to garner trust and respect with their clients. And their clients in this context are the business owners and the entrepreneurs and the developers that they serve. But they're also able to foster and garner respect with their partners, their collaborators, their workforce partners, their education partners, their city partners, their state partners. So trust and respect means building that relationship with your clients and also building that relationship with your partners. So we looked at these commonalities across high-performing EDOs. I mentioned we based this research. It was built upon a foundation provided by the International Economic Development Council. Well, we wanted to kind of see this in action, right? And so we sought out to identify high-performing EDOs in comparable communities. And we wrestled with this methodology quite a bit before we think we got it right. And we sort of reverse engineered this. So I've mentioned the IEDC a number of times. They, on an annual basis, recognize high-performing EDOs from across the country. They recognize organizations from small communities, medium-sized communities, larger communities, major metros. Okay? So we looked at that list of annual award winners from the last 5 to 10 years, and we just started pulling out organizations that were mentioned in these, let's say, medium-sized cities. Now, we recognize this may not be a perfect way to do this, okay? But we could not come up with a better way to identify high-performing EDOs other than recognition by the premier trade association in the world. I want to bring you back to those external factors again, right? Just because an EDO is working in Asheville, North Carolina, or Nashville, Tennessee, doesn't necessarily mean they're a high-performing EDO. It might mean that those are just awesome up-and-coming communities, right? And so we tried to get these external factors kind of out of our decision-making process, and we looked to the IEDC to tell us who's doing things right. And then from there, we came up with a list of about 15, 20 communities, and then we tried to see who is most comparable to Lee's Summit. And we looked at 4 factors. We looked at population dynamics, and so I think dynamics is the key word there. We looked for communities that were somewhat around the same size as you, but more importantly to us, communities that were growing. We also looked at communities that had an appreciating real estate market. Your real estate market looks like this. All of their communities look like this as well. Excuse me, I talk with my hands sometimes. We also investigated the industry mix. We tried to understand, okay, what are Lee's Summit's top 5 industries? What are their top 5 industries? If we get 2, 3, 4 common industries, we're going to call it a match. And then lastly, we looked at a proximity to MSAs. And so we looked for communities that were within an hour's drive of a major statistical area like Kansas City. And so we arrived at these 5 organizations deemed high-performing by the International Economic Development Council, and they share a number of common characteristics to Lee's Summit, the community. So we looked at 3 public EDOs, 1 501c3, and then 1 corporation that had both a 501c3 and a 501c6 embedded in its organizational structure. City of Goodyear, located in close proximity to Phoenix, Dublin, in close proximity to Columbus, Ohio, Rock Hill, Charlotte, Wake Forest next door to Raleigh, and one Redmond outside of Seattle. So I mentioned earlier we had a chance to interview 3 representatives from these organizations. And I just wanted to take a moment. I don't want to read to you, but during the interview process, we had questions for them, and it was, a dialogue, but we were really kind of looking for that aha moment. And these were the 3 aha moments that we feature in our plan. And we thought that these quotes really capture, in a couple ways, the essence of high-performing economic development approaches. I would also say that we found all 3 of these individuals to be dynamic leaders. It was apparent almost immediately upon speaking with these individuals that they were economic development professionals that possessed some of those intangible qualities that we talked about earlier. So our analysis of these organizations is pretty dense in the study. I didn't want to go into, a long analysis of each one here today in front of you, but I did want to call out a couple best practices that we saw. And again, these are pretty well aligned to some of these common characteristics I've outlined for you already, but they were all really well aligned. I don't know if it's because of that proximity to the major statistical areas, but they all spoke or they all demonstrated on their websites or in their marketing collateral that they were well aligned at the local level, the regional level, and the state level. And the funding that a number of them were able to procure from state governments and federal governments supports that evidence. Because of that alignment, because they're speaking as one voice, they're able to procure more resources to support their activities. Another noteworthy finding was they were all highly focused on clearly identified target industries. And I will say that they were not focused on 2-digit NAICS codes. So I don't know, NAICS codes, North American Industry Classification System. Okay, it's a way to identify industries by code. They run from 2-digit codes all the way down to 6 codes, or 6 digits. So 2 codes are like professional services, okay? 6 codes may be like civil engineering, let's say, okay? I bring this up because they were very targeted on 4- and 6-digit NAICS code, very specific industries that they were focused on cultivating, supporting, and attracting. In fact, City of Goodyear employs a project manager for every target industry that they've identified. So they have one individual on staff who has an extensive and deep knowledge in their industry. So if I'm an aerospace company and I want to know what's going on in Goodyear, Arizona, when I connect with them, I'm talking to an individual who is extremely well-versed in the industry, the space requirements, the talent requirements, the growth trends, the challenges, the regulatory environment, you name it. They had, I would call that exemplary customer service and a very strategic staffing approach to economic development. They were all future focused. They were all talking AI and blockchain and, industries that I don't necessarily understand, but they were all future focused. They were consistently thinking about how do we cultivate an environment that unleashes the creative and innovative power of this community to create that next new industry or to create that next new business. They were very aware of what they could control, what they could influence, and they were aware of macro and global economic trends that were affecting their community. Lastly, we found that they were focused on spaces and places. Businesses need spaces and places. Talent needs spaces and places. We were a little bit surprised at that focus on commercial space, industrial space, co-working space, convening space, green space, right? A lot of focus on places and spaces and how that facilitates a vibrant local economy. There were a lot of other findings. Lastly, and I mentioned on the slide previous with those quotes, we found that they had the transformational leadership, dynamic leaders in place that had the technical skills required of the job and those intangibles that elevated them to be a high-performing economic development organization. Oops. Strategic recommendations. So I mentioned earlier, we start every project with a blank Word document. I think that's one of our selling points. We do not have templates. Sometimes I wish we did. It would make us more efficient and maybe more profitable sometimes, but we start every plan with a blank Word document. So I did not know where this study was going to take us. And at the end of the day, we did not feel compelled to make an explicit recommendation for Lee's Summit. I would not feel comfortable coming in here saying, this is how you structure it, this is how you do it, this is what you, no. We wanted to provide a framework that informed your decision-making process as you think about the future of economic development in Lee's Summit. So we've provided some questions that you can ask, some considerations, some best practices, some metrics. We called it on one call, I think, kind of the temperature check that you can use as you're thinking about the future economic development service delivery in Lee's Summit. And you'll see that a lot of these are well aligned with those commonalities that I've outlined already. And I'm not going to read all of these, but I want to know the customers of Lee's Summit, right? Who are your clients? Who are your customers? Who should economic development directly impact, and how does that indirectly impact others? Is it current businesses? Is it prospective businesses? Is it entrepreneurs? It's likely all of the above. How do you prioritize your energy, your time, and your resources to best support your key primary customers? Second, invest in leadership development. I would challenge the leaders of this community to empower and challenge your leaders at the economic development organizations in this community. And that extends to their board. Their board should be engaged, empowered. They should be ambassadors of your community. Economic development, in our professional opinion, requires transformational and dynamic leadership. Technical expertise. Economic development is a profession, and we think that the technical requirements of the job are necessary for any economic development organization and community to succeed. I mentioned that economic development is a team game. And I don't know if this is contradicting myself, but I'll roll with it anyway. It's a team game. The leader of your economic development organizations set the culture. So whether that's an EDC, whether that's a department in City Hall, whether that's your downtown development corporation, whether that's your workforce development board, but the leadership at those organizations set the culture for the rest of the staff members and board members in the ecosystem. The leaders set the culture. I would also mention the diversity piece as well. Diversity internally in this particular context. Staff and board members that bring diverse experiences and skill sets and backgrounds to the table. We believe that that leads to more innovative, creative, effective approaches in economic development. Be prepared to respond to economic shocks. We had a pretty big economic shock a few years ago, a pretty substantial economic disruption. And so we believe it's important for economic development organizations to have continuity plans internally, but also support their business communities and how they think about their own continuity and how they respond to economic disruptions. This could include a broader-based recovery and resiliency plan, which oftentimes includes diversifying strategies to diversify your industry mix, address any supply chain gaps that you may have, address any talent or skill set shortages in the community, infrastructure investment, and climate adaptation plans. Intentionality when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, again, both internally and externally. We suggest that the EDO is focused on addressing barriers of underserved populations in your community, whether that's enhancing or increasing access to capital, more intentional programming, resource and service provision. But we believe intentionality is important to address those barriers and suggest that knowing your client, getting that feedback from your client after you've built trust with them is the best way to do that. Again, think future ready. What can you control? What can you influence? And what do you need to be aware of in a rapidly changing global economic landscape? What are the global trends? What are the technological trends? How are our demographics changing? And how do we address all of those things as we continue to push our economy forward? We recommend that you integrate technology into the economic development ecosystem. I mentioned CRM systems or prospecting software. We also encourage the EDOs to think about how they help their businesses integrate technology to enhance their competitiveness. And this can be limited perhaps by what structure or structures are ultimately the optimal structures for Lee's Summit, but think about innovative and sustainable revenue streams to support economic development. Economic development, you need resources, and to think about how you can creatively sustain funding to support whatever it is you're trying to accomplish with your economic development ecosystem is imperative. Talk about make an impact, developing key performance indicators. Again, it's a difficult endeavor, but thinking about how do we quantify it, how do we think about these qualitative characteristics or measurements that we can employ to understand how we're performing. Consider a financial oversight committee. We do not live in a world with infinite resources, so how are we most effectively deploying the limited resources we have? Perhaps a financial oversight committee would help. Capture feedback, I've mentioned it several times today. For me, that's a function of business retention and expansion. Go out in the community and talk to the business owners, talk to the entrepreneurs, and be responsive. Be responsive to their needs, to their challenges. Again, and go back to say, be a problem solver. Okay, we're getting there. 2 more slides. Again, perhaps you've seen some of this in the common characteristics that I've outlined, but plan for success. Articulate a defined vision for the future. Clearly identify the purpose and goals of economic development delivery in Lee's Summit. Always encourage working from a strategic plan supported by evaluation metrics, but being open to the idea that this strategic plan is a living, breathing document. It may require us to adapt or change or iterate to meet the needs of an evolving economic landscape. And then relationships. EDO, economic development is a team game. collaborate with your partners, foster trust and strong relationships with your partners, and also be very intentional about how you foster that trust with your clients. In this case, that's the business community, the entrepreneurs or prospective businesses. Try to tie all of this together here. I mentioned earlier, if you've seen one EDO, you've seen one EDO. No two EDOs are alike. They need to be customized to meet the needs of the community. Recognize that economic development is a team sport, requires collaboration, coordination, relationships, trust. Leadership is key, I mentioned earlier. In many ways, EDOs are the face of the community. In this context, it's that talent who's thinking about relocating, or that business who's looking at expanding or relocating. EDOs, in many ways, are the face of the community. They need to think about how they can educate, convene, collaborate, inspire, all of that next level leadership. And then it may be difficult, but we do encourage measuring performance, iterating and adapting and changing if you need to, but staying focused on trying to measure performance the best you can, and then always be thinking towards the future, being future ready. So I've talked a lot, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I appreciate the time that you've given me tonight.
All right. Yes, thank you. The report's pretty detailed, so the PowerPoint really helps make sense of some of the, not that the report didn't make sense, but I mean, it's complicated stuff as far as there's so many factors and variables. So I'm sure there are some clarifications the council members are going to want to, or questions. So I'm going to open it up to that. I do want to start off though by, I'm sorry, I'm going back to when I did before with the structures. Because I did read the long report too, and it seemed like the public organizations that you studied, we have been operating, I believe, in the private, under the private EDC category. You have the public, the private, and the P3, the public-private partnership. But when I look at the entities that you studied that were public, our city is actually providing a lot of services that fall under that public entity. So I understand what you're saying. There's no two EDs alike, because and so when I think about that, I think about our, what we call our development services department. Correct. So about, I don't know what year, but 8-9 years ago, 2014, our city put together what we call development services department, and it has gained us, I think, a very good reputation working with developers and even small business owners that are trying to build a building. Yep. We have project managers. We have a lot of employees in this department that that help us with the business community. So I feel like we're a blend of these two categories. Does that make sense?
What I will say is you can have both in one community, right? You can have a city department that is fulfilling some of the common service provisions, commonly associated with economic development. You can also have a private entity that is also fulfilling some of those functionalities. So that can happen. Would I say it's optimal? I don't know. I think that if there are coordinating and complementary, that perhaps both can coexist. If they're duplicative, if there is a disconnect between who does what and who is representing our community,
right.
it can certainly pose problems for the end user, and the end user being the business. I don't know who to go to, so I might not go to anyone. Or if I'm a prospective business and I see we got 3-4 entities and they all look different and I don't know who's doing what, that could potentially be a disadvantage for your community. But they can coexist if they're coordinated and complementary of each other. You can have a public, you can also have.
So, okay, so based on what you're saying, defining roles is really important. And then communicating back, being in coordination and working together. I call it under one flag or one brand or one something. I mean, you say team sport. They get tired of me saying team sport up here because I say it every meeting. But just feeling like we are all on one team, and then, but getting that done takes organization. It takes totally knowing your role. Each organization knowing their role and embracing that role. I mean, I'm trying to make sense of where we are, even though I know you don't know who we are, but.
I think that's right. I would just say, Mayor, I would go back to know your customer. What are you trying to accomplish, and what do we need to do to accomplish this? And then from there, determining what structures need to be in place to ensure our success. So as an example, if I may.
Okay.
Let's say capital access is a huge problem in Lee's Summit. We need to improve access to capital for businesses and entrepreneurs, right? Like, that's a functionality, that's a service provision. We would sit back and think, okay, what is the appropriate structure to do that, right? I would offer up a CDFI, creating a community development financial institution, right? Whose stated role is to lend money and invest money, right? So that's thinking about a challenge, trying to solve a problem, and recognizing a structure that could facilitate that solution.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so can you go to your slide number 11, which I think it's slide 11, which is your common success factors. When you say.
Which
Slide 11, common success factors.
Okay.
Yeah, that one. When you say, what do we want to accomplish? That's what you just said. I'm pretty sure we want to do most of these, that's for sure. But, we might have a different idea of the priority.
Correct.
Me personally, I like that relationship-driven is number one right there. I don't think these are in any certain order, are they?
They are not.
Okay. And I definitely would say that one and effective leadership are two things that we are wanting to accomplish. When you say that, we want to put together something that is effective that we can create these common success factors. That's what I know that we need to do. How we go about accomplishing that is our next step, I guess. Does that make sense, or help me out?
Yeah, I would say, I don't think these are goals on the screen.
Right.
I think these are characteristics that will help you achieve your goal.
Right.
I think common economic development goals, well, you want to increase your population. We start there, right? We want to launch more startups. We want our existing businesses to expand and create more jobs.
All right, well, so go back 2 slides to common functions of EDOs. Okay, so this is more what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, these are functions, they're not goals, but there are goals associated with each, right? We want to minimize business closures. We want to expand our workforce. We want higher paying jobs, right? We want to bring new businesses to the area. Businesses that are poised for growth, that pay family sustaining wages, that support our existing industry mix, that plug a gap in a supply chain, right? And then we want to launch more businesses. We want more lifestyle businesses, tech startups. We want more entrepreneurial activity, right? And then we want our talent, to enhance our talent, ultimately, which again leads to higher paying wages, incomes, and all the outcomes, positive outcomes that comes from all of that.
I think the reason that earlier I said that we're a blend, because on the public side of this, our development services tries to help with a lot of these that are in front of you. They don't do it all.
Sure.
And I think that we have needs outside of what our development services can do. But that they're working hard towards all of these things right here. But there are some needs that we have that you outlined in your presentation where we need, advocacy, for example.
Yep.
That's the problem with the public. Well, you've got these really strong organizations that are public, but the part I'm concerned about for us even considering going all in on that one route is the advocacy component.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's another perfect example of how we think about the structures required of an economic development ecosystem. The attorneys in the room can correct me if I'm wrong, but a 501c4 and a 501c6 are legally allowed to lobby for legislation and policy, right? So if you're looking for, I'm sorry, I'm talking with my hands again. If you're looking for a stronger advocacy initiative or focus, you need a certain legal structure in place to do that.
Okay.
And that's not to say it has to be the only structure, right? So let's look at One Redmond, right? One Redmond in Washington, one of the case studies, they had a 501c3, they had a 501c6, I believe. That was not a coincidence. They probably looked at what are we trying to accomplish, what are our goals, what are the key functions that we need to focus on, and what structures need to be in place that will allow us to do that effectively.
Mm-hmm. And I totally get that there's no template here, there's no one magic, potion or bullet or anything of that matter, but we're just trying to figure out what's structure to consider, and really figure out who we are currently. And I think we can figure out what we want to accomplish. You've given us, some great things to definitely think about and or most certainly talk about and discuss. It's just that if I were to express the fact that I want the most relationship-driven with the most effective leadership and all of us on one team, what's your professional opinion? Like, you've given us these different organizations, public, private, and is the last one a P3? Is Redmond, it's really more of a private.
Yeah. So I had a feeling this question would come up.
Well, it's tough not to ask this question.
Yeah, it's a fair question. And so I would just start by reiterating, once again, our study was to provide a framework to inform decision-making moving forward for leaders of the community. With that said, if there was one organization that stood out to me, it was One Redmond. And I think for a couple reasons. I think the consolidation is efficient. I think it allows them to share resources. They speak with one voice. It is one brand. It is one story. They have the legal structures in place that allow them to kind of diversify their service offerings, whether that's grants, lending, raising philanthropic capital. I think that the physical proximity in which they work is an advantage. So if I had to pick one structure out of all of them that I think is the most well-positioned to serve the needs of a community in 2023, it would be One Redmond, because of the consolidated nature of the organization, the variety of legal structures in place, and again, shared resources, reducing the duplication of effort, efficiency, speaking with one language or with one voice, consistent storytelling. If I'm a business and I'm looking at One Redmond, like, I know where to go. If I'm looking at another community and they have chamber over here and the EDC here and city, and they're all different colors and different brands, and they're all kind of telling me they do the same thing, as a customer, it's going to cause confusion for me. And so I think the more closely we can consolidate and speak with one voice, that would be my recommendation. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, no, it does. It doesn't, but it does. I mean, we're going to have to do some soul searching and some talking and such. And I'll open it up to the council and stop talking here so they can help us start those discussions. So, Councilmember Edson.
Thank you, Mayor. So when you're talking about One Redmond, are they a C4 or C6 but under the city?
No, I think that they, hold on. Yeah, I knew, this is the one group I did not speak with, but I believe they have a 501, so, okay, let's see here. There are three bodies. They operate under an interoperating agreement between its 501c3 foundation and 501c6 chamber and EDC. So there is some interoperating agreement between the two different structures, the three different structures. 501c3, foundation, 501c6.
So can a city, and I don't know if you or our attorney wants to answer this, can a city form a 501c4 or 6?
I'm not sure about a 4 or a 6. I know we can form a 501c3 and give them the start and then push out the door. And I don't know why it would be different for a 4 or a 6, but it's not something I've ever done. So we would have to look, but I'm guessing we probably can.
So if we did that, then council would be able to have a board that's appointed by the mayor and council, and then how the staff is hired would be worked out in some sort of agreement, but it'd probably be by the board, probably. I don't know if that's a question or if you just want to nod your head, Brian.
Well, before we started talking about a particular structure, and we would want to know what all the requirements were for a C4 or C6. I mean, probably.
Yeah.
Long answer, yes, with an if. Short answer, no, with a but. So I don't know that I know the answer for certain, but probably we certainly could be engaged in the formation, the initial formation, but then whether we could provide like an appointment for all of the members or not, there are also issues of control that we would have to be aware of and make sure that we didn't cross into. So there would be a lot of points there we would have to research.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I would point out Wake Forest as an interesting example. So Wake Forest has a memorandum of understanding, I believe it is, or some type of service agreement with the 501c3. So the city funds the 501c3. They have some services agreement in place between the town of Wake Forest and the 501c3. And as such, they have 2 voting ex officio members on the board that are appointed by the mayor, I think they call him the commissioner there. So that's kind of what you're talking about. So I would encourage you to take a look at that one, and I'm happy to maybe get into more detail on that if needed.
Okay,
But
thank
that's
you.
perhaps the best example out of the 5.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, I know we're not going to come to any decision tonight, which is
Right.
probably good, but, you know, I don't want us to give control back up. You know, that was the problem we had last time, was that a lot of the control, even though we were spending money, a lot of the control was out of our hands, and I don't want to do that again. So I'd like to find some way that the mayor and council, whoever that is, can retain some control and influence over whatever we create. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DeMoro.
Thank you, Mayor. You were talking about the one Redmond, the 501(c)(3), the 501(c)(6), but you mentioned a foundation. Can you clarify what you mean by foundation? Is that a
Philanthropic foundation?
okay?
Yep, they make philanthropic donations and grant funding for a variety of purposes. Yep.
So is that an additional revenue source, or is that the solely, or do you know, is that the sole revenue source?
I don't believe that they generate any revenue from the foundation functionality. I think the chamber's membership due, fee for service, and non-dues revenue is really the revenue driver for that organization.
And so the foundation probably has seats on one or both boards?
They actually have separate boards.
Separate boards.
Yep, there's a foundation board. Have to look. There's a lot in here. I believe they have separate boards. If that's not correct, I will make sure that I clarify that for you. But
So if I were to envision an umbrella, would you say the foundation was up here at top, and then the two other entities were below those, or can you define it that way?
no, I didn't find it that way. I thought they coexist equally, and so I just found it's the one Redmond is governed by a 16-member board of directors for the chamber and economic development entities, and then it has a 10-member board of directors for the foundation.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you,
Yep.
Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. So, I mean, this was a fine presentation, but I feel like a lot of this is stuff that we already knew, right? That when I look at these goals that are up here, business attraction, marketing, retention, expansion, entrepreneurial support, workforce development, like we've talked about all of this before. We had a very detailed PSA laying out exactly what we wanted to happen. What I found nice in this presentation was sort of some validation that things like limited accountability, susceptibility to lack of transparency, issues with public trust are all common issues in some of these structures, because I feel like that's a lot of what we butted up against. It wasn't that we didn't know what we wanted or what we were trying to accomplish. It was just difficult getting all of the stakeholders on board and, like you were talking about, collaborating, working as a team and that kind of thing. So it is probably good to look at some different possibilities for how to structure that to facilitate those relationships, but I feel like so much of this is stuff that we know what we want to do. So I don't know, I guess I find myself a little bit frustrated because it's like half of this stuff it's things that we could have written as a council that, you know, here are the goals, here are some of the challenges. And I don't, at this point, feel like I have a really clear idea of a good direction to move forward to overcome some of these challenges.
Right.
So I don't want to rain on the parade. I'm just sitting here looking at this and like, I don't really know what the move forward is, except that I kind of agree with Councilmember Edson that it's challenging, feeling like we don't have a voice in things, or that, you know, we put a lot of public money into something and don't have a lot of insight into how that's being spent to support our community.
I would just say that it's one thing for me or you to say, these are the things that we need from an EDO, And it's another thing for an EDO expert who's done research to say it. So, in other words, is it reasonable for us to expect these success factors, relationship-driven, guided by results, purpose and plan, and more? Is it reasonable for us to have such maybe strong expectations? We said yes, and we needed confirmation. We needed affirmation. And I mean, what you're saying is, okay, great, we've got affirmation. Now what? I would say to that, I would like to have a conversation with council, probably in a work session to discuss. Mr. Weiler said, what do we want to accomplish? Well, I think we know what we want to accomplish, but what's the best fit for Lee Summit? Not what's the best fit for our current organizations that we have that exist at this moment. What is the best fit when we're talking future ready? He puts right on here, common success factors, future ready. What is the best path going forward? And I think we need to discuss. I've heard Councilmember Edson say, I don't want to give up so much control this time. I've heard you say, hey, we know what we want, but what's the best path? I tried to put Mr. Weiler on the spot and say, which one of these entities? I do feel personally that we have taken a lot of things in-house. Not all of it, but we've taken a lot of things in-house, and that's been a point of debate with regard to our current situation with our EDC, with regard to why is the city doing all these things, but we're paying for these services. We feel like we're paying for these services. And so that's definitely been a point of, or a contention issue. But I think that we're not going to get this solved tonight. I don't think anybody expected that. But I'm just wanting to hear, and I think the community wants to hear, and I think the stakeholders want to hear what's on our mind. I just heard you say, yes, we know these common success factors are what we want. And if that's what we want, does that mean a work session to discuss how we're going to achieve these, how we're going to put something together that addresses common functions, the common functions of EDOs? And in that meeting, we can talk about, do we want to move forward with, I think that would be how we would figure out which direction we would want to move forward, or at least take the next investigative steps with. We're not going to do it now tonight, but if we're looking for affirmation, we've got a lot of affirmation. But I think it's good to know what our council wants to do as far as next steps. Do you want to talk about this some more? Do we want to talk about in a work session, this scenario, this scenario, this scenario? But sooner or later, we need to choose a direction. So you still have the floor.
I mean, I'm fine with a work session. I guess I felt like we were presented with a few different options here, public, private, triple P, but I heard this expression recently, assume a can opener, like assume that you have the thing that will let you do what you want to do. And I look at this and I'm like, well, a private entity sounds great, except that how do we find one that actually functions the way that, ideally it does in this report? So a work session is probably the time to discuss that. I looked at this and felt like I'm seeing this ideal version of what could happen, but I don't know how to get there from here.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. Thank you. Councilmember DeMoro?
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't see any other lights, so I thought I'd chime in. I think it would be best suited for a work session, and because I think we are mindful, and we need to continue to be mindful of the success factors that were listed, and the success factors that drive an effective EDO. Gathering information. This is the first step. We've gathered information by this summary and this presentation, and very good presentation, by the way. And the path forward, we can define that path forward. We will define the path forward, And, in the back of my mind, I'm going to be very, very mindful again of the success factors, because that's something that we were deficient of. A lot of success factors did not come our way. We did not hit the high notes. And so I'm looking forward to a work session. I would welcome a work session and talk more about this and define a policy, a path as a body. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So before we keep going with this, I think I just need to say that if we did a work session, that would mean and require that we, talk about options and we play through options. You look at, okay, you could go this route, you could go this route. What is it we're trying to accomplish? And we would have to speak through these types of work sessions. So that would require, staff. It would have to require, staff to work on this and, and preparing something that would facilitate this discussion in a meeting, a public meeting. So I just want to make sure everybody knows what that means whenever I say work session. It would be one of those types of things where we would literally be talking about, well, we could go this route, we could go this route, we could go this route. You're talking about, Mr. Weiler, the pros and cons of each of these. And we are, the way we've always tried to address and the way we've problem solved is we're like, well, this is what we want to accomplish. We see the negatives, pros and cons, but we want to mitigate for the negatives. We want to mitigate for the negatives and do something special. That's the way we've approached developments. That's the way we've approached applications that come through here. We choose what we think is the best path for us, and then we try to mitigate the problems that come with this. I don't know if that sounds reasonable, but that's the approach that I'm thinking as I hear you all speak. So I'll keep going around and getting discussion. Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, just to keep the topic consistent or the perspective consistent, I'd be in favor of working or moving towards a work session collectively of our body. I think just briefly to understand why we're here, just even to listen to Mr. Weiler's presentation, was because collectively, this body of elected officials that are here as stewards of taxpayers in Lee Summit, we want to make sure we get it right. And collectively, I'll say it again, not just one individual up on the dais, collectively, all of us felt that the previous PSA agreement with our previous EDC group and the way things operated did not fulfill the obligations. They didn't meet these basic requirements that Mr. Weiler has pointed out as best practices. And so that's why we're here. And so that's why we need to, I heard the phrase path forward. I love that phrase. I heard Mr. Weiler speak about future. We got to think about future. What do we want for the future? I don't want to go backwards. What's happened in the past has not worked. So I'm ready to move forward. I think we need to roll up our sleeves and come into a work session and come out with something, a defined economic development path for this city, so that we can continue to keep this positive momentum we have going on. We, thankfully, we're not in a dire situation. We have a lot of positive momentum growth in this city, and if we get this right, it's game changer. So I'm in favor of moving forward, not backwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Felker.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Weiler, for coming to present to us today. Thank you very much. So I'm just thinking a little bit, Mayor, about your comments about how to approach this, and that's what's been on my mind is how do we structure this work session? What kind of questions do we need to ask and seek to answer? And obviously calling on resources of staff, and perhaps there's even questions that we could generate as council members that we send to staff that say, this is what I'm trying to, these are the questions I'm trying to get to the bottom of. And then as council members, there's a couple of things I'm thinking of. One is we have a resource we've just been presented with that should kind of, I think the more we engage with that resource, Mr. Weiler, that you and your group have provided us, the more knowledgeable, more thoughtful approach we can take to what we're talking about. I'm not remembering exactly the name of it, but I do know our EDC did a study with Northern Iowa, I want to say, is an organization, and I think it would be helpful if we were familiar with that, what its findings and suggestions were. Again, it just kind of rounds out our knowledge as to how we could approach things. And then the thought that Mr. Weiler emphasized is knowing who your clients are, your customers are. So we're talking about this, but I don't think we can underestimate how important it is that we are also bringing input from who those stakeholders are. I don't know how to do that, how to engage that conversation. Clearly, part of the impetus for this has been a struggle in terms of having that kind of, the relationship-driven approach, some of the struggles that we've had there. So how can we invite that kind of input so that we're bringing that input into our decision-making? So again, my thinking is having a series of questions that we need to work through, questions that don't drive an outcome. I guess that's the hard part, is how do you ask questions that don't point to a certain outcome so that we can arrive at an outcome that's really part of the process of thinking through and reviewing good information that we have at our fingertips now, and then how can we actually engage the stakeholders that this process, is supposed to actually serve. Thank you, Mayor.
Yep. Thank you. Councilmember Pryor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I would like to move towards a work session, but I'd also like to continue to explore the option of, and I know we spoke about it at one point, like council maybe going to other cities around us to see how they operate, to kind of get a better idea of how even locally different things are operating.
Okay. We have talked about that. We talked about doing what we call a site visit for nearby communities. I say nearby. I think we're all willing to travel a little bit, and I still think that to do that, we need to go equipped with what questions we would need. What are your thoughts on a site visit type of thing?
Well, I will say that both Wake Forest and Dublin, Ohio, welcome you with open arms. We did mention that as part of this process that your team, city staff may want to reach out at the conclusion to speak with them and potentially visit. So my short answer would be like I believe that they would be open to that. Second, I think that the questions that you're looking for, I believe we've outlined some of those in the study as part of this strategic framework that I think, they're meant to be kind of introspective for the purposes of this study, but I think they could be repositioned in a way that helps you kind of understand, again, structure, strategy, and how that is connected to their performance.
Okay, thank you. We can talk about that more, I think, in the work session, because we're not going to get this solved in a short amount of time in a work session. So we're going to need to. It's going to take some elbow grease on this one. We're going to take some work. Does that sound good?
Yep, that does. Thank you.
Okay. I think this is hard because the word you used, I heard Mayor Pro Tem Lopez say ecosystem, or I heard him say a bunch of words that you said. I wrote down the ones I liked. Ecosystem. How do we create an ecosystem? Of course, you're. Oh, you did right. Good. Advocates, cheerleaders for the community. Your EDC should be that. We want all of those things, and sadly, probably Councilmember Felker was speaking, directly or indirectly to the fact that, we have to find a way to engage our stakeholders, and that's just not happening. That's like not happening with regard to in a healthy way. We have not had healthy discussions with our stakeholders. They've been contentious. They've been not with this group, not with this council, and it's been a huge barrier.
So, if I may, I would start with the business community. What do they need, right? What do they need to flourish, grow, hire more people, open up a second location? And that's where I would start.
Well, we're going to have to do that questioning ourselves, because right now we're being told what the business community wants, and we need to hear it directly ourselves from the business community. So how do you propose we do that without going through our EDC? Because that's what's part of the problem right now. I mean, we would have to create our own task force. We'd have to create our own special committee from this work session to bring in and engage, because I know our EDC wants to be in the room. They want to be up visiting and talking right now. But we've been through this song and dance year after year after year where they come up and they tell us things are going to get better, and it hasn't. And that's why we're here today.
So if I may, and I don't know anything about the EDC. I want to point out something that I thought was noteworthy from Dublin, Ohio. Every single staff member for the economic development entity in Dublin meets with at least 75 businesses a year, from executive director all the way down to an associate. And so, to use an overused sports cliche perhaps, but like business retention and expansion outreach, like that is your blocking and tackling in economic development. It's that trust I talked about earlier, building that trust with your business community, and not only helping them solve problems, but identifying trends and themes and common challenges, which can be challenging in its own right because of confidentiality issues. But utilizing technology, focusing on connecting with your business communities and kind of aggregating those needs, those challenges, and those themes, I think that that's where you start to really kind of uncover what is needed in terms of the service provision that you're offering. So whether the EDC is doing that now, I don't know. Whether the city has a role that they can play in trying to kind of amplify or increase that volume of outreach visits, but it's imperative to do the blocking and tackling, and that's to go out and talk to the businesses themselves to find out what they need.
Okay. I've got another Councilmember DeMoro, go ahead.
I'm going to interject here. I do think it's very important to, take the temperature of the business community, but just recently, and one goes back a few months, and that is a major food manufacturer here in the city of Lee Summit that is doing a huge expansion. I've gone to 2 ribbon cuttings lately. The major hospital just down the street here is doing a 100,000 square foot expansion and remodel. And then we have another food service group that is doing a major expansion. So we're, in a sense, we are listening to the business community on our own and reacting, because we had favorable reaction on this dais to all 3 of those. And that's major. That's workforce, that's expansion, that's jobs. And I just thought I'd throw that out.
Yeah, and
We
I
are
hope that I
doing
was in no
something.
way suggesting that individuals on this dais aren't connecting with businesses or the city isn't. I just think it is of the utmost importance that they're very intentional about connecting with those businesses and supporting them. And it sounds like you're doing that.
Well, I mean, we can do more, though. We can do more. I'm not drawing the line there, but we're hearing from the business community.
Yeah, and I would say, so there's 2 things when I think about business retention and expansion outreach, right? It is that problem solving, that relationship building, that making connections, like that's kind of phase one. I think when you start to become a high performing economic development system is when kind of phase two, and that's the ability to kind of start to uncover trends and themes that can inform service provision, resources, policy, right? And again, that can be a very difficult thing because these conversations are confidential, but how does the economic development organization kind of start to put those pieces together to inform their service delivery? That's when I think it becomes a high-performing functionality.
But the thing that we have to be, mindful is who are we missing? Who else is out there that we can contact with? So I do appreciate your comment. Business, that's what drives the economy. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Okay, let me open up to staff. Mr. Dunning, have you heard anything that, causes you to say, hey, want to ask a question right now? Do you want to sit on this? We'll set a work session. Believe me, I'll be ready for a work session. I'll have a bunch of questions if we're going to go to a work session. And we can start getting to the heart of this matter. I think this was great information to be able to use in that work session. I think it's great information to pass to the business community, just like you're saying, as well as, for us to think about. And I will admit, Councilmember Shields, when she said there's nothing in here that we didn't kind of already know, that's because we're pretty great. We know what team looks like. We just got to figure out how to get there as a team under one brand, where we're all working together and we all share this passion for community over passion for an entity, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, I think it's a fair observation about the report. We were certainly committed to uncovering some revelatory, information. I think for me,
I'm not discrediting it. No, this is affirmation once again.
yeah, I think affirmation is the right word too. I would also add that recognizing it is one thing. Like understanding how we activate it, I think, is perhaps where we're struggling a little bit, right? Like how do we activate this so that we are demonstrating these characteristics that have been identified of these high-performing EDOs? And we tried to identify some of that through the case study analysis.
Okay. And then we can, because we do value the work, Councilmember Felker said, we may need to engage with you again. I feel the same way. I mean, you've been great about answering all these questions. This research is wonderful. I just feel like once we head down a certain path, we're going to need to check back in. Whether it doesn't matter what path that is. It'd be nice to check back in. So if we could work something out on that.
Yeah. So we have world's greatest workshop facilitator on staff at TPMA. So perhaps that's an option. A structured work session, perhaps.
I don't know that they would want to work with me in a work session.
Okay.
I'm teasing.
You let me know. We are open. I don't necessarily feel comfortable selling you right now on our services. But yes.
I want to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into.
I am a resource.
I'm pretty different in a work session.
Okay. I'm a resource, and I have enjoyed my time with your staff immensely. And so we are hopeful that we've provided a value to you with this study and are happy to continue this relationship. So.
All right. Well, we're gonna digest all this. I know that we need a break. So thank you so much, sir. Thanks for traveling here.
Yeah.
Safe travels back.
Yes.
And much appreciated on the
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you. Thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to take a 15-minute well-deserved recess. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to bring this meeting back to order. Proposed ordinances, first reading is where we are. We're going to start with Bill number 23-090. Councilmember Shields, would you please read to advance to second reading?
Thank you, Mayor. I move for second reading of Bill number 23-090, an ordinance approving the First Amendment to the amended and restated development agreement between Paragon Star LLC and the City of Lee Summit, Missouri for the Paragon Star project.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading. The bill number 23-090 by Councilmember Shields, seconded by Councilmember Pryor. Discussion. Yes, Councilmember Hodges.
Thank you, Mayor. There's just a few things that I think in regards to Paragon that I think need to kind of be addressed and be put out there. There's some things that I have not been impressed with at all, and I feel like are being overshadowed by maybe some articles that are being thrown out, like look at us, look at us, look at us. It is exciting, but on the other hand, I think we need to address the fact that, first off, I was not too impressed with the fact that we approved for them to have an event held at their at Paragon Star this last weekend, because where I'm coming from is if you've got a commitment to teams in a soccer league and you can't fulfill that commitment, and you are screwing over a lot of players, a lot of teams that have invested money in you guys, and you are not, you're saying, hey, let's go for the quick dollar over here, but, you know, forget about these guys who said, you know what, we want to invest in you. We want to take part in your league. We're excited about you. And I'm kind of coming at this from a parent, but also as a council member, because I've had a lot of people come to me knowing that I know both sides of this. And this is not, I think the approach is not filled with integrity, because there has been some emails sent out to these soccer coaches that has not been fully honest. And I don't really like the blame being shifted on the city, saying, oh, you know, an email that went out was, hey, sorry, we have to cancel your game because the fire marshal won't sign off on occupancy. Well, that's not fully true. I think you guys need to be completely honest and full of integrity. Say, you know what, maybe we overpromised, maybe we got too excited, but that's not the approach that was taken, and I think that that's a bad look for you guys, and especially when you keep coming and asking for a one-time event or two-time event coming up. I don't think that that's a very humble approach to be taking, because we're overlooking the people who've invested money and even asked for refunds because you are not fulfilling your promise. And there's no callbacks for refunds, nothing. So I just feel like that is not a very good look for you guys. And this is coming from somebody who is super excited, super excited for this to be here, because we are a soccer family. We will utilize that. But I just feel like when we've got citizens coming to us saying, what's the deal? This is not a good look. It's hard for us to say, no, just hold on. When, for instance, this Friday, our team was even told, hey, do you want to play this Friday at Paragon? After 3 games have already been canceled. You're making promises that you don't even know if that's going to be fulfilled yet. And I don't think that that's a good way to present yourselves. So I don't know. I just felt like that was something that needed to be put out there. Because again, of course we're excited. Of course this is an exciting thing to finally be happening. But I think when you've got 10 years of developing this project and then to act like we don't know, or that you don't know what's going to be required of this project all of a sudden, it doesn't come off a very full of integrity, I guess, from you guys. So I felt like that was a bad look from you guys. So I just kind of wanted to say that and how disappointing it was. And I really do hope you do address the teams who are trying to get refunds because they're not getting what they were promised out of you guys, us being one of those. I will say there's teams, luckily we also signed up for the Kansas League. We're not out for the whole season, but there are teams who put their trust in you guys because of what you told them, and they don't get to play anything. So being in competitive, that's a big blow. So I just think that you guys need to take the humble approach and say, you know what, we screwed up, and you know what, we're going to make this right. I just think that would be a good look for you guys, and I don't know, I was just kind of disappointed when I kept hearing those things, because we were super excited for this to come to our city. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Elam, you want to, I'll let Councilmember Shields go, but then I want you to answer or be prepared to say what the plan is as far as the special events and such, as far as pertaining to this amendment to the restated development agreement. Councilmember Shields?
Thank you, Mayor. I think probably my questions are actually going to be very much along the lines of yours, Mayor, that I was hoping that Mr. Elam or Mr. Bushek could discuss why we're making this amendment. I understand a little bit of the background is that maybe they were, the Paragon Star was letting itself out for events but hadn't met all the requirements of their development agreement in order to open the facility. And I just want to understand a little bit better of what happened there, why we're amending this, and how this is going to address that issue going forward.
Yes, Ryan Elam, Assistant City Manager. I can answer some of those questions, and I can answer the questions that are directly related to the development agreement and the development agreement requirements associated with that. So this is the first amendment to the amended and restated development agreement that was agreed to in January of 2021. In that agreement from January of 2021, that was an amendment of the original development agreement, and the original development agreement included requirements for some offsite infrastructure, and it outlined what was required in order to receive what we call temporary and final certificates of occupancy. That's for the use of the facility. The original development agreement said that all of the improvements had to be done, major improvements being the interchange. So there's an interchange improvement requirement that is associated with the preliminary development plan when the project was originally approved, amongst other improvements, including the water main and the soccer complex itself. In January of 21, that was amended as a result of putting in place a phased approach to occupancy and use, and as a result of KCMO restriping View High Drive, and they took it from 4-lane down to 2-lane and added some bike lanes. So there was another series of phased improvements that would be required in order to receive temporary or final occupancy for the sports complex, as well as what was called Village Phase 1 and Village Phase 2 at the time. So that requirements have been spelled out since January of 2021. As far as events being scheduled, I can't speak to that other than we became aware of it through their website and through people asking us if events were going to be happening out there. And then in April, we received I think a full 6 months of events that had been pre-scheduled that we had not received before. We had conversations back in January of this year, reminding about the interchange improvements and the development agreement requirements, and that those needed to be addressed. And we went and had some negotiations and discussions, really that started, I'll say, predominantly March, April timeframe. But again, the 6 months of events didn't come out until mid-April. So the primary purpose of this development agreement amendment is to modify those conditions to allow use of the sports complex to be more in line with what is currently completed and allow more of an additional phased approach to the sports complex itself, as well as providing security for some of those improvements that remain incomplete at this time, particularly the interchange, as well as the remainder of the sports complex. And the development agreement will allow the use of the sports complex only, contingent upon the receipt of a performance bond for the interchange and cash escrow for the remaining items in the sports complex. There's a few other minor things and minor cleanup items associated with the development agreement as well to more closely align with the proposed phasing moving forward. The development agreement still would not allow any certificate of occupancy, temporary or final, for any of the improvements in the Village Phase 1 area until those improvements are complete. That includes the interchange and the water main and striping of View High Drive, as well as confirmation from KCMO and MoDOT that those improvements have been completed. The performance bond also has a timeline associated with it that would outline at what point, if substantial progress is not made, that the security would be acted on in order to finish the improvements associated with the project. So to circle back to the special events, the special event permit process allows, in the UDO, allows kind of individual events to potentially occur. And with the requirements of the life safety and the requirements of the special event permit process kind of being met, and with the development agreement amendments modified or agreed upon, the staff was able to issue a special event permit for one weekend. And then there's another special event permit that's been submitted that is issued with the condition that pending the outcome of this discussion this evening for this coming weekend. Both special event permits were conditioned with the intent and very specific language that no additional special event permits would be considered for this property, since the use of the complex is essentially a special event overall. Kind of equated to if we had a wedding venue that wanted to have a wedding but didn't have their all of their requirements met, so they wanted to have a special event that was a wedding, that would be the use of the facility. One important thing that I forgot to mention earlier about kind of the history of where we ended up with a lot of this. The interchange improvements, there's been some correspondence with MoDOT that occurred, I think I'm going to get the date of the letter wrong because I don't have it exactly in front of me. But we received MoDOT concurrence that they were okay to allow the opening of the sports complex without the interchange being complete. That was a big piece of information that we did not have until I believe, mid-April, before it was very clear. I think it was April 17th before we had that.
So the development agreement, as it currently stands, requiring these improvements has been in place since 2021?
Correct.
So 2 years that they've known about these specific requirements. And they went ahead and scheduled 6 months of events without a certificate of occupancy or a temporary certificate of occupancy, and without talking to the city about, hey, we really want to get moving on this. Is there any way that we can amend the agreement, get our certificates of occupancy just for, like, there wasn't that discussion prior to the city finding out independently that these events had already been scheduled?
So as far as these specific events, no. Back in January of 23, we sent a letter indicating, hey, you've still got these outstanding requirements, and we know that you're planning on having an event in March. How are you going to meet the interchange requirements, and how are you going to meet the requirements of the development agreement? We had a meeting towards the end of February, I believe, to talk through some of that. And the result of that meeting was they needed to get MoDOT concurrence. They needed to update the traffic impact study associated with that to prove out that that was something that MoDOT was going to be acceptable to. At that time, they did not provide a listing of those events. So we did not know that that was the date. We didn't know the extent of the events that they had previously planned.
So was there proactive communication from the developer at any point, or was it always the city reaching out, hey, we see this is coming up, we need this? Did they reach out proactively to say, this is coming up in March, and we want to, like, this? I'm just trying to understand why it rolled out this way.
Proactive consideration from the developer on that item. I'm trying to recall, but I believe it was a result of the January letter that was sent. So I would have a hard time saying that there was proactive communication outside of that.
Okay. I guess I understand trying to be flexible and work with our local businesses, but I'm sort of frustrated that like the city goes to a lot of effort to put in place these agreements to say, here's what's required to operate these facilities, and before you can operate, here's what you need, and that it feels like some of this has just been ignored to a certain extent. Maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, and I guess this amendment will help protect us going forward to make sure these improvements are met, but I mean, this project has been under development for years and years. None of this should have been a surprise, so I don't understand why it's coming up this late in the game and why they're having to get special event permits to operate for things that they shouldn't have scheduled without having certificate of occupancy in hand.
Yeah, I can't speak to that specifically. I don't know if you'd like them to speak to that or not, but I know that I can speak with the facts that I have in front of me.
Sure. Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, let me help, because I think it's gonna, I'm seeing my computer and it's just gonna be a continued conversation unless I try to at least try to frame this discussion. So I definitely share your concerns when it comes to how the citizens and the development operates and such. But I also, I gotta stay focused on this redevelopment agreement and if it's the right thing to do. And what I see in this and what I know about this is the last month of negotiating staff. I don't know how long it is, Mr. Elam, you can correct me on the timelines. But staff and Paragon Star have been very actively negotiating, I guess, basically, how to get this done. And I think staff knows that we are concerned about special event permits, even though there's a real gray line there where you can issue a special event permit, but then we are sitting here going, what's going on? Why are you issuing all these special? So staff's trying to make sure that they're communicating to Paragon Star that there's going to be concerns, and then they start working on a path to solve for our concerns. And I think, and sorry, I'm not trying to speak for you, Mr. Elam, but your staff, Mr. Dunning, I'm assuming legal. I see our attorney is here, Mr. Douglas. They've put together what they feel is a solution to be a stopgap for our concerns. And it's not that I don't share the concerns again, but I think that we've got, Paragon Star has put a lot of consideration on the table and put an agreement forth that's what we need to try to focus on, because we can get to the finish line. I can't speak to the operations though, but we can get to the finish line with regard to, the road, the ballpark, the improvements, the parking, the interchange, things of that nature with this agreement. And so I have no problem if everybody wants to let Paragon know their frustrations. I'm okay with that, as long as then we make a decision objectively about the fact that they have put this consideration on the table, which is, what's the wording of it, Mr. Elam? It's
a combination of a performance bond and a cash escrow.
Yeah, so they've put this on the table as in, okay, yes, we need to finish these things. You've put a timeline on it, Mr. Douglas. Would you mind stepping up here? You've put a timeline on it that Mr. Elam has described as, would you call it, the progress? The
substantial progress.
Substantial progress. So, Mr. Douglas, the question is this, we have concerns. They're going to continue chiming in. Is this going to help us get to the finish line, this redevelopment agreement?
Yes, sir. We've tried to lay out a time frame of what it's going to take to get the acquisition of right-of-way, the finishing of the plans and specs for building the interchange, That's going to be a process that's still going to take a while. It could fall in place relatively quickly, but there may be a need for condemnation, and I know that you guys have had a number of discussions on a number of other projects for how that might be necessary to complete a project. But the critical element here is there's a number of sources of funds. Some of it is expected to come from Paragon Star. There's also a cost share agreement that we have with MoDOT, and we need to show substantial progress towards completing the interchange by June 30 of 2024. So the dates that we've lined out here gets us to a point where if Paragon Star can't get this thing to a place that's manageable to retain that cost share agreement, we've left us enough runway to push forward with the project so we can complete that interchange project. There's a number of other projects that are more short-term, finishing the parking lot, finishing the soccer complex, doing some of the water main improvements that needs to be completed. Those are all expected to occur relatively quickly, and so that's why we've used, and there's also some complications from the payment bonds that are in existence on those projects because they're so close to being finished. Adding the city as an additional beneficiary or dual obligee on those policies was going to be a little bit complicated and difficult. So we've tried to be flexible. We put together the cash escrow to deal with those things that were going to be upcoming expenses for them anyway in the near term, so it gives us that ability. And then we've used a performance bond to make sure that we can draw upon that in a timely manner to make sure we don't lose the cost share agreement.
Okay, so thank you for that. That's excellent. Is it fair to say that you foresaw that you might have this frustration, and you pursued this in an attempt to let us know that this is a solution. This is the solution for the city to look out for our interests. Is that why you pursued it? Because
That's correct. We're trying to find a path forward for everybody, but at the same token is getting the interchange completed is very important for the TDD that was formed. That was a critical element, and we thought we had funds that would have been there from the proceeds of TDD bonds that have been already issued. The public funds are been invested in this project to the tune of about $29 million already. But included in those funds, we thought would be sufficient funds to complete that. And we've now found out that there's about $1 million left in those bond proceeds. And we want to try to make sure we get the interchange completed and we get the soccer complex completed as two main points of why we're trying to get the project done.
and then the other thing, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and I'll get to Councilmember Pryor. He's next. The biggest concern I would have would be, I guess, more staff-related. Are we safe to open? I mean, thank you, Mr. Douglas. I mean, those are great, and we might have more questions for you, but it sounds like we've got a solution with this, with the consideration that's been put forth, with the time conditions, terms, but is it safe?
Yeah.
We're talking, is it safe, public safety, access and such?
So
that's the biggest concern.
Yeah, so they've provided an updated traffic impact study, and that traffic impact study indicates that no additional improvements are required at this time until anything in the village was to open. So because of that, their impacts showed that they could open the facility, the soccer complex, with minimal impacts to the existing infrastructure, and MoDOT has concurred with that finding.
Okay, so as much as I'm not happy about, it not being as smooth as possible, I'm feeling like this is the best and a very good path forward. So let's keep going from there. Councilmember Pryor, I'm going to turn it over to you, the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so I was kind of wondering the details of the special use permit. Is it just
The special event permit.
the special event? Yeah.
Big difference.
Is it what?
Big difference between special use and special event.
Yeah. Is it just for the weekend? Does it include practices? What all does it entail?
So the special event permit is for a period of 3 days, and It is, I've got to look back to Josh. Yeah, Josh may know a little bit more about the actual details associated with the special event permit itself, but it is for essentially, I believe, soccer games for this weekend. But the special event process isn't really contemplated to go to say, okay, we're going to have this special event, then we're going to have another one, then we're going to have another one, then we're going to have another one, then we're going to have another one. That essentially is use of the facility. So, do you have the details of the special event? I can pull them up right now.
From a process perspective, just to let you guys know, it's a comprehensive review by fire, police, planning and zoning, and for fun, public works and water utilities are there. However, what that contemplates is issues like, hey, is it safe? Do we have the access we need? And so that was looked at with this, what's existing, and will it suit the needs of the event? This one was odd because all of this was going on at the same time, and we knew that certain improvements were not in place that were required as a part of the original development agreement. So originally, we had a series of special events submitted to us that was like soccer games, soccer practice, soccer games, soccer practice. So as it sits right now, we've denied the rest of those and just said last weekend and then this weekend. And the one for this weekend is particularly contingent upon tonight. If this first reading is not successful, that event does not happen.
Okay. So it's not a blanket special event. It's a specific special event. They're 3 days at a time. They can continue to make applications as needed, but it gets.
No.
I was going to say, Mayor, they can make applications. That's an accurate statement, but we're not in a position to approve those special events. That's not meeting the intent of the special permit ordinances. Does that make sense? We're only
Right now, but if we pass this, you can continue to issue special events.
only this one for this weekend.
And then after that, what?
So after that, the requirements of the development agreement are what will determine the use of the facility. So
So it's a temporary, basically temporary status of occupancy.
Yes.
Yeah. So they don't have to keep doing the special
Exactly.
events. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we can get past that with the passage of this ordinance.
The passage of the
this-
ordinance
of this-
and the fulfillment of the requirements of the agreement.
Well, the eventual fulfillment of the requirements of the agreement. Well, you're talking about the security that they're
Yes.
putting up. Yes,
Yeah,
the security,
we
not
have to have the
not the punch
security.
list. Okay.
Yeah, we have to have the
Understand.
security in place.
Exactly.
We have to have the cash escrows in place.
Right, so we don't have to keep going through, staff doesn't have to keep trying to decide, do a special permit, special event permit and more. We can, this is gonna create a temporary, as long as progress is continuing to be made, and we'll take a look at this at the end of the year.
Yeah, and it would be, assuming that those documents are submitted and approved, then a temporary occupancy would be issued for use of the fields. Would be kind of on a field-by-field basis, if you will. So the temporary occupancy at this point would be for 4 fields. I believe it's 1, 2, 5, and 6. I could be off on that, but it's only 4 fields. And then as they develop more parking out there and the parking gets accepted, then another field could be opened and another field could be opened, et cetera. With the max intent being the 10 fields of the soccer complex only. Anything on the village requires all of the improvements to be in a state of substantial completion and accepted by those authorities having jurisdiction.
Okay, sorry, Councilmember Pryor, I interrupted, but I was trying to get clarity for you, because it's a great question. Thank you.
No, and I actually still was wondering if it's safe enough for this weekend, why are we stopping at one weekend? Why not? I mean, if they're gonna make the improvements, I guess I'm just not understanding why only one weekend.
Currently, we don't have security for the improvements to be complete.
Do they have a timeline on what I
think, I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. Mr. Dunning, do you understand what she's asking? Because she's asking, I thought I just clarified that it's going to be, with the passage of this, it's going to be a temporary occupancy. In other words, you don't have to continue to do special event permits. You can actually run the facility on those fields that you just talked about, correct, Mr. Elam?
Yes.
Run operations on those fields.
Yeah, run operations on those fields,
But
assuming.
they can have practices.
Well,
So it's not for one weekend? Okay,
Good.
Let me see if I can stair step us through this.
All right.
So this is kind of a phased approach to opening, right? With this agreement that's before you this evening, agreed to by Paragon Star and his staff, we said it's a special event permit for the flag football that was connected with, the draft. And so with that agreement by the two parties, we felt it's a special event permit, which is allowable, but those are only allowed for certain intents, right? And so that was a 3-day period. So that was granted. This is structured to be that a second special event planned for this weekend could be approved if this first reading goes through. And we know that's not full approval because it requires a second reading, but that shows that, okay, we're going that direction with the knowledge that if this goes through tonight, then that special event permit could occur this weekend. After that special event, roll the ball down the hill, that special event is held this weekend, no further special events would be authorized. The agreement then is in place and must be met in order to allow for temporary occupancy of the fields in a phased approach. Ryan just mentioned they just have 4 fields complete. So that's going to take some coordination to open up the additional 4 to 6 fields as those come on board to make sure that parking is adequate. All these other public safety matters are in place. So I hope that makes sense.
Well, so I'm still confused about if it's safe enough for people to play soccer. Well, okay, so like Faith's team, for instance, if it's safe enough for them to play soccer this weekend, then why are we stopping it at this weekend? Like, why can't they complete the stuff that we need them to, that they're supposed to complete in the time frame? Huh?
Yeah, it's all time-driven, right? It's time to complete these other requirements. But part of the, if it's safe to open this weekend, we as staff we're kind of in a little bit of wearing dual hats here. We want to be helpful. We want this project to be successful, but we also wear a hat as a regulator, and this agreement is adopted by ordinance. We as staff don't have that authority to waive what's adopted in the agreement. That takes mayor and the council action. So we're trying to find ways to, I'll say, navigate and meet the intent of what this agreement calls for. And so that's this, Mayor mentioned negotiation, right? If the developer in this case is wanting something prior to having the agreement conditions done, then I think it's only fair to us to say, okay, this is a negotiation. What do we need to plan for given the status of this project at this time? And that's the approach that was taken here to get us to this point.
Councilmember Pryor, if I may, there is an existing agreement in place. There's an existing development agreement with existing requirements that dictate when we are allowed to consider issuing an occupancy or not. Given that, and given the information and where the project sits today with the current agreement in place, we are not allowed to issue any sort of occupancy for the fields out there. So in order for the project to really move forward with really any use, a modification or amendment to the development agreement is necessary.
Okay, thank you. And then do they have a timeline? I know the timeline's set for them, but do they have a timeline on when it would be, when they plan on having everything completed that needs to be completed? Or do we know?
I haven't received an official timeline. Most of the minor improvements I've heard May 30th is their goal. The interchange is unknown.
Unknown, it's unknown, but they have to make substantial progress before the end of the year.
Okay, can we ask them, just because I am curious on what they're.
I'm having a hard time allowing them to even step up here, considering the way I was spoken to at the break. So you might want to keep that in mind, that, you know, this is tough. I'm up here trying to defend what is in front of me to get an approval for it so that we can move forward. So I will tell you that no, I'm not inclined at this very moment. Answer the questions, Mr. Elam, or bring Mr. Douglas up, or Mr. Dunning, or I'll bring Brian Head up. We can talk about this all night, but I will tell you this. I'm not real happy right now.
Yeah, so kind of as I stated, really by the end of May for the parking lots, the rest of I'll call them the completion of the soccer complex towards the end of July for that. And then the interchange, again, is the big unknown as far as a completion timeframe is concerned, but it has to be substantial progress has to be made by June of '24. It has to be complete prior to any occupancy for the south side of the river, so for the village phase. And that construction schedule on that is going to be dependent upon when they start on that, but it could be one season, basically a one construction season project.
Okay, thank you. And I missed what happened at break, sorry. I didn't know about anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember DeMoro.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Douglas, my intent is not to be redundant. We've talked a lot about timelines and everything. My question has to do specifically with the performance bond. That performance bond is specifically tied to the interchange, correct? That $8 million, $8 million and some changes is tied specifically to the interchange, correct?
That's correct.
And so best case scenario is June of 2024. When does the cost share with MoDOT, when does that expire? Do you know?
We have to show substantial progress towards getting the interchange completed, which means that we have to have it, or the expectation for MoDOT is that it would be under contract by June 30. And so at that point, then, as we start with the contract, as costs start being paid, then either developer finishes that up or we have the performance bond to assure that that gets completed. And we know that can satisfy the requirements to keep the cost share in place to pay the balance of the costs that are expected. So that the amount for the bond is at $8.2 million was derived from original estimates for the cost of the interchange, adjusted for inflationary factors that and some of the other things that have been part of the negotiations to get the interchange, this relocation of Mears Road. There's some multi-use paths that have to be put on View High Drive, but all those came up to the cost of what is necessary to get it done, subtracting out the cost share that we have, and that's how the $8.2 million performance bond was derived, but that was provide the assurance to make sure we can get it completed.
Okay.
Michael may be able to add.
I think Mr. Park has it.
Yeah, thank you. Michael Park, Director of Public Works. To more specifically answer the question on the expiration, if you will, of the cost share. Right now, we're on kind of an annual renewal at the request of MoDOT staff and the support of MoDOT staff, and they are the ones that provided these conditions for what they consider reasonable progress to gain their support to continue asking for the appropriation of those funds. And so the project has extended its original timeframe, if you will, for the cost share. But MoDOT has supported a renewal, and Jefferson City, by its appropriation, has renewed that cost share over and over, to the extent where MoDOT has drawn a line and said, these are the conditions which you will get our support again. If you fail these conditions, the cost share is subject to be lost. And as Mr. Douglas had said, that's June of 2024 to show that reasonable progress. Essentially, it's ready to start construction at that point.
Okay.
And we have other dates within this development agreement, as I think to your say. We had a runway so that if the performance and progress isn't being met, that somebody can exercise those bonds, that security, to ensure that we meet that deadline over a year from now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parker. Thank you, Mr. Douglas, Mr. Elam. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. Councilmember Shields?
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so I'm open to supporting this tonight based on the fact that we've studied the traffic and the safety and that we're getting the financial security in the form of the escrow and the bonds. But I do just want to state for the record that I think it's important that this developer and future developers respect that when we have requirements in a development agreement before a certificate of occupancy is going to be issued, that we expect those to be met before events are held. And that I understand that the timing is tricky, that getting a response from MoDOT on anything, I'm sure, is tricky, and that kind of, we butted up against the start of the soccer season and all these other things. And I appreciate that we're having some flexibility in trying to find a solution that works for everybody. But I just want to say that I don't want this to be considered to be a precedent to this developer or any other developer, that you can just ignore requirements and deadlines and expect to start operating and be given special event permits until you get things together. That I don't think that's a good policy, and that I'm willing on a case-by-case basis to try to be flexible and find solutions for people, but I don't want that to be our policy going forward.
Thank you. And agreed. Councilmember Hodges?
Thank you. Actually, Councilmember Shields summed up exactly what I wanted to say. I do support the performance bond. I mean, if this is something that will help complete it eventually, I think that that's the route that we need to go. But with that being said, I also want to make sure that again, I agree with it, but I don't agree with how, again, things have been handled. And this is just me saying one more time that I really hope you guys step up on that area, because I want you to do well in the future, and I think it's going to bring great things to this city, and it's got so much potential. So I want it to work out well in the future, and I just don't want the first impression to ruin your future. And so I think with that, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that part of it and just say, just have some integrity in that, you know, people want refunds, give them refunds. Say, you know what, we didn't deliver on our promise. We're sorry about that, but please come back next season. You know, that would just set a good precedence for you guys. But again, I do support the performance bond, and whatever helps it come to fruition. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right, I think we're about ready to vote. Do you want to, please?
Thank you, Mayor. I haven't participated in the conversation. I should have announced it earlier that I'm recusing myself from participating in this due to a conflict of interest. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any further discussion? Okay. I know this is a lot of work. Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Thank you, Mr. Elam, and all the staff that's been working on this. Mr. Dunning, thank you to Paragon Star for putting this together so we can move forward, just like Councilmember Hodges just said. We want this to be a success. So with that said, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. It does pass 7-0 with one recusal. All right. I don't even know where we are.
Item C.
All right. Yes, this is Bill number 23-091. Councilmember Felker, would you please read to move to second reading?
Mayor, I'd like to move to advance to second reading, Bill number 23-091, an ordinance approving the City of Lee Summit's Community Development Block Grant 2023 to 24 Annual Action Plan.
All right. We have a motion to move to second reading. Bill number 23-091 by Councilmember Felker, seconded by Councilmember Edson. Discussion? Councilmember Edson.
Yes, Mayor. You know, this is the CDBG Block Grant Action Plan that goes through CEDC in a public hearing or a public process every year. And first of all, I haven't gone through this process in a very long time, and the rest of my committee has never gone through this.
Oh, wow.
So it was a great meeting. I was really proud of all the council members. And in a discussion, which I believe was led by Councilmember Shields, the committee decided unanimously to take the money that is usually set aside from this money to pay our administrative costs, that is our staff cost to administer this, said, well, we don't want to take that money away from these nonprofits. We want to give that money out. So of the $71,000 that was set aside for the administrative costs, we decided to give an additional $53,000 to the Lee Summit Housing Authority and an additional $15,000 to Children Habitat for Humanity. And so I hope.
It's on top of or that's to use up the full 300 and, how much is it?
370,000.
370,000.
Yeah.
So usually we set it that aside for administrative costs.
Yes, yeah. So in total, the Housing Authority will get 173,000 and Term and Habitat will get 145,000. So we were really proud of that. I was proud of the committee members, and we wish all the folks that are getting money good luck.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing it up because I think it just shows the character of the council, what we're trying to do. I understand when times are lean, we might have needed those administrative dollars, but when times are better like this, to think that you're giving back to the community, thank you for making that decision and putting it for us to vote on.
And we did promise the staff members who administer that they would still have jobs even if we did that.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
I thought you were gonna,
Sweating a little bit.
knowing your sense of humor, I thought you were gonna say you were gonna offer them pizza or something, but, okay. All right, so, taking care of some of our nonprofits in the community. This is an annual thing, but this year we did something kind of bold and courageous. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. Passes 8-0. Goes to second reading. Councilmember Edson, would you please read Bill number 23-092?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to advance to second reading Bill number 23-092, an ordinance approving a funding agreement between the City of Lee Summit, Missouri and Colburn Rice Investments, LLC for the proposed Colburn Ridge Development Project.
Thank you. We have a motion to move to second reading, Bill number 23-092 by Councilmember Edson, seconded by Councilmember DeMoro. Discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. And it's adopted, moves to second reading, 8-0. Thank you all. That takes us to proposed ordinances second reading. Councilmember DeMoro, would you please read Bill number 23-089?
Yes, sir. I move for adoption Bill number 23-089, an ordinance repealing ordinance number 7386, dealing generally with automated license plate reader technology.
Thank you. I have a motion to adopt Bill number 23-089 by Councilmember DeMoro, seconded by Councilmember Edson. On behalf of Councilmember Lovell, I'll say that he is a nay on this, even though he's gone. And we had lots and lots and lots of discussion on this. So if anybody, wants to vouch for me, I put it on the record. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please cast your vote. All votes are in. Please record the vote. And it passes 7-1 with Councilmember Shields also objecting. But it was good discussions. Very well done. Committee reports. Yeah, Councilmember Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. Legislative and Intergovernmental Relations Committee will meet Monday, May 8th at 11:30 via Zoom.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Felker.
Public Works is going to dust off the mothballs and meet at 5 p.m. on May 8th. We have 4. You're right. We actually did move our time up. So I forgot about that. So far, it's still on the calendar at 5 p.m. So I think we moved it up to 4:30 if we can move that forward on the publicly available calendar. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember DeMorro.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to announce that on May 15th at 4 p.m., we will have a Finance and Budget Committee meeting. And the only reason I bring it up a little bit early to get the mindset on the 15th, because we did not have a meeting yesterday. So I just want to clarify, we are going to have one, but it's on May 15th at 4 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee reports? All right, council comments. What a exciting night we've had. Councilmember Edson.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Dunning, during public comments, we had the gentleman who used to be on the Historic Preservation Committee, and he was talking about the ice house and getting the 3D renderings. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind following up with that and let us know what you think about that.
Yeah, I know it was part of the downtown master planning process, was doing some of that 3D imagery, and I know that comes at a cost, though, but that's something I did write down a note to kind of look into that, so we'll certainly do that.
Okay, and number two, he mentioned that that the last time they met, they had minutes, but then they've been put into the commission and the minutes aren't available, which I imagine has happened with 6 or 8 groups.
Yeah, I thought about that too, and without having that follow-up meeting to approve the minutes, perhaps that's something that I'll work with law department just to, say these were the minutes, but the Board of Commission got reorganized, and just a footnote to that that Board of Commission didn't have the opportunity to fully approve them and then make them public, but I noted that one as well.
Okay, yeah, just so those are captured somewhere, I think would be good. All right, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I will say that Matterport is a 3D, it's pretty affordable these days, Mr. Dunning, but I don't know that that's what he was, the public speaker was talking about. Matterport's pretty nice, if you all know what that is, but it's not, I don't know to what detail he was wanting. So it's Matterport. Most of the architects know what it is.
Okay.
All right, other council comments? I'm impressed with the questions tonight for the EDC, yes, but then also we had the development agreement, and I really like the way we want to, the comments that were made, that we want to do things the right way. So I thought it was good. I thought what we did, they're not easy conversations to have. The EDC conversation is not easy. We're gonna have to really move forward with more specifics in a work session or beyond. So, but I think this is the right group to do it with. So, Mr. Dunning, we're gonna have to get a plan. I will tell you this, we're gonna make a decision based on what's best for Lee Summit. That's the decision we're making. What's best for Lee Summit? And we will figure that out. But we're not gonna be lobbied for reasons that aren't what's best for Lee Summit. We're gonna stick together, we're gonna make good decisions, and we will do what's best for Lee Summit. And yes, there's always things you have to mitigate for. We talked about it. Problem solve, it's never gonna be perfect. Whatever the problems are that we're looking at, we're trying to use the best path, and then the cons or the negatives associated with that path, we mitigate. And that's the way we've been so successful, and that's the way we'll do it going forward. So I'm ready to continue these conversations, Mr. Dunning. So I don't even, I know that council doesn't like hearing this because I got some busy people up here on this dais, but I'll do it whenever, wherever. I will do it at 4:30, move up a meeting if we have to have an early work session in front of a council. I'll do whatever it takes. But if anybody thinks that we're indecisive, our council, they're wrong. We have never been indecisive. We make good decisions. We vet them thoroughly, though. That's what's going on here. We've been vetting this thoroughly. We went and got affirmation that things, we are right to have certain expectations when it comes to EDO, Economic Development Organization, and beyond. And so that's what we're doing. We've stuck to our plan, and now we'll finish it. And I'm all for engaging the businesses. I'm all for talking about this in council. I'm for whatever it takes, but it is time to move forward, and we will do that. And we'll mitigate for the negative side of it. But I've always said this to this council, and that is, we want to be the best. We want to be the best. And that's what I liked about the thing tonight, is he didn't just tell us what everybody's doing around us, because that's what we all wanted to hear. I did. I wanted to hear what they're doing on the Kansas side. I wanted to hear what they're doing up north. I wanted to hear what they're doing everywhere. But you know what? He came in and said, you know what? You want to know what's... We'll show you the best. We'll show you the best practices. We're going to go outside your area to do it. And it was a little frustrating, but it probably was what we needed to hear. So I feel more confident moving forward, and I want you all to feel confident that I know that that was a little bit tough. It was long, but we had to go through that. That's part of the process, and we're all process-oriented council members. So we're doing our job, and we'll finish it. So with that said, Mr. Dunning, you'll get the last word.
There was a lot of activity in volunteerism last week. As part of that, we already mentioned a lot of the cleanup efforts, but the Recycle Fest was taking place too. We got results if you're interested to know some of the stats. I see some head shakings. Over 1 ton of paper shredded, 7 bicycles recycled. Gosh, 136 pairs of shoes, 1,875 wine corks.
Did you say wine what?
Corks. Wine corks.
My wife collects those.
I know others that do too.
Oh, okay. You can make cool, okay, anyway, go ahead, keep going.
Oh, let's see, 199 license plates, 113 pairs of eyeglasses, 2,750 pill bottles, 4 gallons of crayons, 71 rechargeable batteries, 52 cell phones, 7 hearing aids, and 42 tennis balls. So a good mix of
wow.
Recycling and repurposing things. So I think it speaks to the need for this, or to the desire for this within the community. So kudos to Public Works and everybody that helped out with Recycle Fest.
Yeah. How many times did you go, Councilmember Pryor? Did you go like 5 or 6 times, drop things off to recycle?
No, well, I was picking up trash.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so no, I didn't, but I do fill my recycle bin for the trash company every week, so, yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you all. Staff, I know you guys have been working hard, and tonight was a good showing, so thank you all. With that, we're going to close this meeting at 9:50.